Hello, and welcome to Cosmic Dream Sanctuary. This is an inquiry into John Dee, past life karma, the magical founding of the British Empire, and extraterrestrial and angelic contact. It is an inquiry into the relevance of all these topics to the current world situation that may actually involve extraterrestrial or non-human intelligence contact. So how this works is I will present an introduction to this inquiry. I will talk about the nature and the greater story of this inquiry as it has unfolded in my life. I will review a bibliography that was presented as part of the study of this subject, and I will offer some conclusions and next steps to the situation. So this inquiry framework is based upon my education, my professional experience, and my personal experience. My professional and educational credentials include a bachelor's degree in Western Liberal Arts from St. John's College in Annapolis, a master's degree in East-West Psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies. My advisor there was Dr. Craig Chalquist, who put forward the Terrapsychological inquiry methodology, which I will reference throughout this presentation. I'm certified in Beyond Quantum Healing, which comes from the work of comes up and out of the work of Dolores Cannon by way of her student, Candace Craw-Goldman. I have a certificate in hypnotherapy in the spiritual counseling modality of depth hypnosis. I'm ordained in the Universal Life Church. I am the Chief Dream Officer of Dreamwell, a mobile dream journal app for your sleep, dream, and well-being. I'm the technical co-founder of lightnet.org, which is a citizen science platform dedicated to studying consciousness. And I hold about 5 years of experience building interactive data visualizations and maps. So I want to show you all of the references that will go into this inquiry. This is a lot. There's many references, and I will simply summarize them as we go on. But I just want you to know the breadth and depth of the study that I am offering here and now. This study and this inquiry really does culminate in a self-published book called The Book of Galactic Light, also known as Liber Lux Galactica, which you can find more about on my website, cosmicdreamsanctuary.org/book. And as you can see here, this book is co-authored by me and celestial beings, which is somewhat relevant to the topic at hand. So just pointing that out. So the summaries of this finding, you might be wondering who John Dee is, how is this relevant, whatever. It turns out that the British Empire was in part founded upon magical rituals of celestial or angelic communication performed by the scholar, the royal advisor, and the magus John Dee. Dee performed angelic communications for the purpose of empire, healing, and knowledge. The angelic entities that he communicated with provided a system of communication that is a source of meaning along multiple dimensions. The language itself is complex and meaningful. It contains codes related to physical constants, cryptography, and socio-religious themes of the highest order, meaning it relates to the founding of the British Empire and the unfolding of the Holy Roman Empire, as well as the physical constants being similar to that which is encoded in the pyramids, similar to that which we are discovering now in modern physics. They also inspired centuries of magical practice at the highest order. For example, Rosicrucianism, Masonic practice, the Order of Golden Dawn, Aleister Crowley's OTO, and Jack Parsons and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So we are not talking about fringe stuff here. We are talking about the very center of Western civilization, the very center of colonization and empire. So that's very important to understand how vast and how potent this inquiry is. So let's continue. This is an example of the language. I want you to have an example of the language that was channeled to John Dee, who was the 16th century scholar. He was the Renaissance man, and he learned so much that he needed to communicate with angels. He had 4,000 books in his library, compared with Oxford's 300 books. He received a system of language, something similar to what we might call light language or glossolalia or speaking in tongues. This is an example of it. So as you notice here, there are 3 lines. The first line is Enochian. This is the Enochian script. It's actually written and read right to left, but in the case of this document here, it is put from left to right in order to correspond with the English language. And I will simply just read this out to you because this is what the angels, through a system of communication, provided to John Dee. It's not supposed to make sense to you right now, but I wanted you to have the flavor, inviting different dimensions of your being into this inquiry, because we'll spend a lot of time with the linguistic and intellectual because you've seen the reference list already, but just to sort of tune into the deeper feeling. So I invite you now to take a breath and just be open as much as you're willing to be open, knowing that this is a language given to John Dee and Edward Kelly, the 16th century scholars, advisors, alchemists, for the purpose of communication with celestial beings. And so the pronunciation here, it is not really well defined, so I'm just going to go with what I do. I'll read the English and then we'll move on. So, Il stabam el parte casarman vapacais darge disoado caos giorsko diso max manaski boevoib od ete gis Iaidik Zakarod Zamran Odo Kerkle Kea Zorge Lapzerdo Nokomat Hoathiada. O thou, the governor of the first flame, under whose wings are 6,739, which weave the earth with dryness, which knowest the great name righteousness and the seal of honor, move and appear, open the mysteries of your creation, be friendly to me, for I am the minister of God, the true worshiper of the highest. So this is really a communication angels gave to John Dee for the purpose of celestial communication. This is one of 49 calls you do to invite celestial energies into your life or into communication. I want to talk a little bit about my personal outlook, why I'm actually doing this inquiry, why I'm speaking about this inquiry now. It is a relatively uncomfortable position to speak about my personal testimony with extraterrestrial, angelic contact, and also the past life things that are coming up and through this inquiry. I don't have a really strong definitive place to stand on. I can't tell you for certain anything about these things, and I just know there's something meaningful here. So the reason why I've done this inquiry and put this forward, even though it's 10 years in the working, but really in the last 6 months it's come to a head because I've been seeing alien threat narratives being put forward. So alien threat narratives, what are alien threat narratives? We're talking about extraterrestrial contact. We are talking about extra-dimensional or celestial beings or some other such thing that we often see in manifestations through UFOs or UAPs. We don't know actually if they're extraterrestrials in the UAPs either. That's really important to know. But what's been coming forward in the media and narrative and from our governments is that these things might be a threat. And while a lot might be or some might be, I don't actually believe it. My heart tells me these creatures are not a threat. If they can demonstrate that technology, we're seeing they can do a lot more. So there's a threat narrative going on. It's being put forward in part. These are the people that have triggered me into doing the work by Marshall V. N. Summers, who is an angelic channeler. He claims to be a prophet along the lines of Jesus, Muhammad, bringing the new message of God. And actually, looking at his works, I said, you know what? He's talking to the angels. John Dee talked to the angels. It looks like anybody can talk to the angels. And so I'm offering this as personal testimony that you yourself can talk to the angels, and you don't have to listen to angry old white men about what angels say. I think the world is sick of that. So angry old white men, I'm sorry, but it's really not effective anymore, or really not relevant. Let's turn towards our hearts that are softened with love and connection with earth. That's who we need to be listening to. It's your own heart. David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins, both untrained hypnotists that have put forward a theory of alien abduction that has run rampant in our culture, that it is completely, absolutely false most of the time in terms of the representation of these narratives. Of course, the alien abduction experience is real at some level and has some amount of gravity to it, but it is not the widespread experience that these guys talk about. Similarly, with the military-industrial complex, and some intelligence communities are putting forward this alien threat narrative. There was 1,500 pages put out by a FOIA request from the Sun recently, and you saw, the side effects are like radiation, accidental pregnancy, other things like that. And yes, there are side effects of interactions with UAPs and UFOs, but it is not necessarily something that we need to build up systems of defense against. Much rather, I would say we need to all meditate and learn how to forgive each other. All right. So this narrative is triggering because of unresolved colonial wounds. This is the hypothesis. This is my personal understanding, is that these people are putting forward this narrative. We are actually afraid that the aliens will come and rape and pillage and kill us here on Earth, like the Europeans, the colonial Europeans, raped and pillaged and genocided indigenous populations for the sake of colony and empire. So we haven't forgiven ourselves, and we haven't done the reparations to those cultures, and even to ourselves. The whole world is still wounded by this colonial activity. And so it's still active in our subconscious, and we go, oh my God, we see it everywhere, because we are not healed. We don't acknowledge it. And this work here, the historical life of John Dee, the inquiry here, can serve as a mirror for the healing of these wounds. In other words, catharsis. So that is my personal understanding, is when we engage and look into this inquiry, it will provide acknowledgement to a lot of the challenging aspects of colonization and British Empire, because John Dee coined the term British Empire. Without him, we might be speaking Spanish. Everyone might be speaking Spanish. So he has his fingerprint on the world in anywhere that speaks English, not England. It's because, in part, of John Dee and his celestial communications. So we can look at that, and we can start to heal this issue around contact, around colonization, and things like that. All right, so what if John Dee and Edward Kelly, what if that Enochian language I shared with you were actually from non-human intelligences, like the angels or extraterrestrials? What if we are afraid of the aliens just because we have not yet healed from the wounds of empire? What if the non-human intelligences, the celestial beings, the angelics, the extraterrestrials, are literally just waiting for us to heal and then invite their presence into this world, so that we can join a galactic community that has higher order technologies that can help transmute the issues that we are experiencing now with the climate change, with our industries, with our empires, right? What if the new Earth is available and open to all. You just need to open up to it. And what if the John Dee story could be a potent path of that opening up? So let's talk about trigger warnings. That was the preamble. Maybe you were triggered in that, maybe not. But now we really have to acknowledge that everything that I'm offering is theory, data, testimony from reputable sources, right? So, but listening to these may trigger intuitions, memories, dreams, feelings related to the contact of extraterrestrial or non-human intelligence. And it might also involve, trigger you in terms of colonization if you have on-process guilt around living in an empire, a colonistic empire that has raped the earth and has genocided people. That is awful, but you have to acknowledge it. You have to forgive yourself. You have to engage in a path of reparations. If you are not engaged in those, this will trigger you. And I hope that if you're willing to stay with me throughout this inquiry, because I think it can be a potent path for healing and integration. If any of this material is challenging for you, actually, I would invite you to think of everything like a dream journal. You can say, oh, this guy, he's just sharing his dreamlike experiences, right? These things aren't real. The angels are made up. But I'd invite you to hold that notion if that's useful to you, but to also kind of open up as much as you're willing to the gravity of what I'm talking about. Just seeing all those references, all those slides of references that really speak towards this truth. All right, so dialogue is invited. Nothing here should be understood directly as fact. Some of it's like historical rumor. Like John Dee coined the British Empire, term the British Empire. He used the magic mirror to scry. We don't actually know a lot of those things, but I'm offering them. Everything I offer in this inquiry is really based in some literature. But just like John Dee, I demand the responsibility that you take responsibility for your own personal discernment, right? He was a spy. His records have multiple layers of meaning, some of which are contradictory, like the Bible. All of my statements invite you to personally discern their relevance in your life. I invite civil dialogue regarding this inquiry or related experiences. Please email me, daniel@cosmicdreamsanctuary.org, to start a conversation. All right, this is the opening prayer of John Dee, who would say this before he talked to angels. Teach me, O Creator of all things, to have correct knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. For your crown I deeply desire. Speak your word in my ear, O Creator of all things, and set your wisdom and understanding in my heart. Amen. All right, so this is the chronology of the inquiry that I'm offering. This inquiry comes up and out of my graduate education at California Institute of Integral Studies. I was there in the East-West Psychology Department. I received a master's degree. The master's degree project, the thesis project, was looking at the Jungian foundation of collective unconscious as expressed through quantitative analysis of dream reports. So that's the work I'm putting forward now through Exo Metaverse and lightnet.org. From there, I was my advisor was Dr. Craig Chalkwis, who put forward the Terrapsychological inquiry methodology. And we'll get into that more, what exactly that is. But this is seeing the whole world, the earth, as a psychic being, as a psychical being, not necessarily telepathic, but having a psyche, and understanding that land and historical movements of people are expressive of that psyche. And that if you want to, you can engage in inquiry with that psyche of the earth to help you learn something. So you do that through both historical learnings, observation of folklore. You pay attention to your dreams. You invite synchronicity, omen, messages, and things like that. I started studying John Dee primarily because of the interest I've already said. I was like, wow, this is amazing. I think he contacted something. I think this is core to history, and we'll get into exactly my perspective then. But I started studying this back in 2013 or 14 in relationship to my hypnosis training. I went over to England to engage in a terrapsychological inquiry about Dr. John Dee. I visited the Showstone in the British Museum, and then I received a mysterious infection in my arm. That freaked me out. I stopped studying, and I'll get into exactly why this is relevant. From there, I worked with interactive data visualizations, focusing on maps, and for a long period, serving libraries, actually. In 2020, I said a prayer to be of service to others in alignment with my desire and destiny to work with extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional contact phenomena through hypnosis. Immediately after that, I got in contact with and was actually guided to a man named Dan as well, who has had missing time experience relating to CE5, a Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind experience down in the Atacama Desert. That challenged me to revisit the John Dee Project, to work with the spiritual aspect of that infection so that I could be present with the missing time experience, right? From there, I was guided to a study group. So I was triggered by Marshall V. and Summers. I was participating as a web developer, supporting the Making Contact Convergence conference that was in a digital space online. Marshall V. and Summers was talking. I listened to him. I was very triggered, and I said, you know what? We're going to actually take this. We're going to do this, and it's going to be for not from the basis of colonial woundings, but yearning for healing of that, so we can embody peace, love, and desiring connections with our galactic community. I was inspired to do a study group based on that communication. The study group is the Dr. John Dee study group. This is where the bibliography comes from. From there, I gained enough skill or wherewithal to do the ritual of communication that was put forward in Dr. John Dee's work, the Spirit Diaries. This is the Enochian Magick ritual. We'll talk all about these things. That ritual then turned into, I recorded everything, I transcribed it, and then it became the Book of Galactic Light, which is up on the YouTube channel. You can now get to it. This is that ritual in Book of Galactic Light is why I'm offering Cosmic Dream Sanctuary as opposed to Cosmic Dream Hypnosis. Remember in that call, there was an identification of the self as a minister and worshiper of God. And I said that maybe like 90 times over 30 days in this heightened ritual of angelic communication. And the angels bought it. So then they reminded me, hey, by the way, you're actually like a minister and worshiper of God. Like, shift your work. And I was like, oh, I guess that makes sense. So let's get into what terrapsychology is. So, by the way, this inquiry has a lot of reading, and because I want you to sample each of the texts that have informed this inquiry so that you have a orientation to this subject matter, because it's really important. It's really complex, and I think that even though this might take 1 to 2 hours, something like that, to get through, it'll really be worth it. So, terrapsychology. In his recently published book, Terrapsychological Inquiry, Restoring Our Relationship with Nature, Place, and Planet, Dr. Chelquist introduces the qualitative research methodology, terrapsychological inquiry. Terrapsychological inquiry is a form of seeking inquiry that takes seriously our intense inner responses to the state of the natural world. Terrapsychology is a theory and practice approach that studies from the standpoint of lived experience how the world gets into the heart. Oceans and skies, trees and hills, rivers and soils, and even built things like houses, cities, ports, and planes. How do they show up for us inwardly? How do our moods, feelings, and dreams reflect what happens in the world? Terrapsychological inquiry evolved over a decade of experimentation by graduate students, instructors, workshop leaders, and presenters, and other embodied creatives to offer a truly earth-honoring mode of story-based, qualitative inquiry, one that changes all all involved from passive spectators of the doings of the world into active, sensitive participants. Learn how to use this methodology of re-enchantment in a variety of settings inside and outside academia, and by doing so, re-enter an animate world. So this is from the description from his book. You can get to that on his website. And I have all the references here in the slide. It should be on the website as well, so you'll be able to get to those. As part of the inquiry methodology, I started studying, but I started recording my voice. I started recording my voice every major milestone of the experiences, and I thought, hey, one day I'll transcribe these things. I also thought that mode of communication and of recording things was very apropos for John Dee, primarily because he worked with a man named Edward Kelly as a scryer. So John Dee would sit very much like a hypnotist, and have Edward Kelly very much like a hypnotee. Kelly would enter trance, John Dee would ask him questions about what he saw, and dialogues would unfold, and they would then write that down in the spirit diaries, and we'll get into those a bit later. But I thought how vulnerable it must have been to be Edward Kelly, to be so sometimes controlled by John Dee, sometimes like forced to express what's inside of his heart. So I thought how great it would be to just express myself completely and work with somebody else to transcribe it. So sort of a reversal of the Dee and Kelly situation. So in this way, I recorded everything. I've been doing that since. I have just gigabytes, I suppose, of audio recording. I rarely transcribe them. But I'll get into these transcriptions here. This is from a journal entry called The Ground of Inquiry. It's from 2013. My inquiry is into certain topics surrounding the life of Dr. John Dee, a unique type of inquiry based on the terrapsychological inquiry methodology I first encountered at California Institute of Integral Studies through the work of Dr. Craig Chalquist. Terrapsychology is a way of looking at our relationship with the earth as one of reciprocity between two psychical entities, attributing consciousness, sentience, and perhaps even volition to places. Their materiality is in the form of archetypal mythology, folklore, songs, and so forth. This is how they appear to us. Terrapsychological inquiry, then, is a way of conversing with the place itself, with Earth itself. What's more, it remembers everything, and it has a will that we manifest our highest potential. The Earth wills that we live in harmony with the cycles of the cosmos. We can encounter these things directly in experience through the heart. I'm using the terrapsychological inquiry methodology as a number of things. First, it is a spiritual practice. Second, it is a way of gaining knowledge. Ultimately, I want this inquiry to be of some value, as it provides self-knowledge to the reader, just as I discover myself in the biographies of Dr. John Dee, understanding myself in relation to his history. At the moment of reading them, I am fully present. I'm inquiring about John Dee using the terrapsychological inquiry methodology because many of the themes he dealt with are specifically relevant to our current historical condition, and much of his activity was ignored by history. We are still in the delusion that is central to John Dee's erasure from history. I hope to effect some benefit to the reader through this method, and in doing so change our way of thinking about our relationship to the earth and what Dee termed natural magic. So speaking about John Dee's erasure from history, this is the understanding that we are not necessarily, that we need priests or whatever to mediate our relationship with divinity. Basically, it's basically the delusion is that the empires are useful and not challenging for our presence here on Earth. All right, so this is recorded in 2013. I'm at British Museum. Tuesday, November 19th, outside of the British Museum. It's 4:08 p.m. and it's getting dark. I just saw John Dee's showstone. It's his magic mirror. They have it here, along with 3 wax tablets with the seal of God inscribed in it. I think they were the same seal. One was about 9 inches across and a little bit bigger than the magic mirror. The others were about 4 inches across. They were used to support the table of practice, which was where John Dee would have Edward Kelly look into this mirror. I asked them where it was. They didn't know, but I knew where it was and I found it. It was strange to see them because I've seen their images many, many times. They were all of a sudden real. They were a lot smaller than I expected. You could pick up the mirror, I suppose, with one hand. I felt something. I felt something when I was there, a sort of nervousness that I realized John Dee and Edward Kelly used in these magics. It became very, very real. I didn't get any visions or whatever like I kind of hoped for, but that's all right. I saw them and it was amazing. So these are the objects in the British Museum. I didn't actually see the globe, the little crystal ball, but I saw the other things. And this is, we'll get into it later, but you can see inscribed on the wax tablets, this is the Sigillum de Ameth, and it has the names of angels and a lot of stuff on it. So we'll talk about that later. Let's talk about, this is from my the transcription of the infection. It looks like the date on the slide is wrong. This was 2 months afterwards, or a month afterwards, something like that. I arrived back in Oakland, and a couple days later, I did a workshop, movement and sound healing workshop with my friend Randy Stevens. A couple of days after that, I started experience, I guess you would call it a depression. I was depressed. Everything seemed kind of gray. I started smoking cigarettes. I started smoking pot every day. I meditated every day. I knew something was going on. I just didn't know what it was. I thought I was wrestling with ghosts from Auschwitz, which I visited. Just existential despair. I felt like I was wrestling with the balance of light and dark. I thought perhaps some entity, some spirit attachment happened, either at Auschwitz, looking at John Dee's mirror, or in my workshop. The day after, I noticed a swelling, a lump, or something in my arm, an inch or so above the elbow on my left arm, and it felt as if it was an expression of the kind of darkness I felt. I thought perhaps this infection was a physical manifestation of this thing, but I didn't know what it was. I thought perhaps it was a tumor. I didn't want to deal with it. I avoided the issue. I never consciously thought about it. I would think about it and then I would push it away in my head. I thought perhaps it would go away. A few days later, it's still growing. It gets to be about the size of a golf ball. I start heading out to the woods, trying to move, trying to get some energy. I couldn't do it. I knew at that point I had to do something with my state of being, my spiritual condition, and my emotional condition. The next day it's grown. The skin above it is red, and it's expanded maybe 3 or 4 inches surrounding it. I showed it to my mom. This is on the 20th. She said, "You've got to go to the doctor. You've just got to go to the doctor." So I looked for doctors nearby, something I could walk in, kind of cheap. I just so I could talk to one. I found a GP named John Constantine. I liked his name, which was the name of the comic book Exorcist. I liked what Yelp had to say about him. I went. I thought it was what they call. He thought it was what they called student's elbow. I started taking that the next day, the solstice, the 21st. I was icing it. Took off the ice pack and realized my arm was swollen. There was redness from my forearm almost up to my armpit. He said, "You gotta go. I was thinking about you." So he called me on the phone in the morning. "You got to go to the hospital. I was thinking about you. It just doesn't make sense. The symptoms aren't what they say. They don't add up. It looks like a blood clot, and that's dangerous because it's above your elbow. You could have a stroke or a heart attack or die. Go to the hospital, get an ultrasound, see what it is." So on the solstice, that's what I do. I go to the hospital, I get an ultrasound, I'm in a room, the clock has stopped at 12. It doesn't move. The doctor comes in and says, oh, gee, the ultrasound says it's clearly an infection of some sort. So she says it's an abscess. That's the body's way of sealing off an infection. It's moving. It's close to your torso now, the redness. It's not good. We have to cut it open, get that infection out by squeezing out the pus. Both doctors went through a litany of questionings. Did you get any cuts here, any scratches? Are you a drug user? What do you think caused this? It was just kind of strange to them because I had no cuts, no bruising. It's strange. We just don't know why. So she opens it up. It's really deep. It's deep in my arm. So deep she numbs it. She cuts it and she keeps cutting and cutting on the numb part. I feel the scalpel cutting my flesh. I kind of yelp a lot. She numbs it again. She cuts it so deep. She has to numb it yet again and cut in. Very unpleasant. I'm very grateful it's not a blood clot. It's an infection. We can treat those. We're treating it now. It's not immediately mortal. A blood clot can move. This is a crisis, but it's a slow crisis. If I just do what they say, I'll be healed. She gets the abscess, she cuts it, and she says, ugh, this is hard. It's not full of pus. It's full of what looked like congealed infected blood. So that's strange. At that point, I'd been asking the doctor, what is it? What causes it? They don't know. So she finally cuts in and says, oh my gosh, it's just infected, congealed blood. Nothing is coming out of this abscess. So at that moment, I have the intuition that because this isn't physical, I will not be healed until I deal with the spiritual cause. It's a spiritual cause. It's probably something I picked up at Auschwitz. There's such things as a whole branch of occult science devoted to these astral entities that are either departed souls, creations, people's habitual thoughts, but they live in the spirit plane and they can attach themselves to living hosts like parasites. I thought that's what it is. Maybe, I don't know. But I did have the intuition to see a woman named Teresa, who was my mentor in core shamanism and ran a drumming circle in San Francisco. I told Teresa it felt like, and so she does this ritual, and now this is a description of what happened afterward. I told Teresa it felt like a film lifted off. I said, it's like this whole world is of suffering and pain and a history of war and stuff. Without forgiveness, we're stuck into it. But it's really a film, a surface, like a bubbles on the surface of water. If we don't let go, if I haven't forgiven, I haven't healed. I'll never know the depth of it, the true reality. I'll never live and see this truth. And she said, yes, it felt like a film lifted off of you in the healing. I'll never actually know the stories, but it would be good to write them. And if I need to, just to make things up. And then I realized yesterday, and Josh, when you emailed, and so Josh is the guy I was working with to transcribe these, I totally forgot the purpose of my trip, which was to investigate the magic of John Dee. I looked at his mirror, and so now I suspect that trip, the motivation to investigate John Dee, a strange and obscure character, his experience in some way mirrors my own, and I will find catharsis in working with it. Actually, I wanted to reflect on John Dee too. When I decided to do this, a number of people said, oh, past life things. It's kind of a coincidence. I was so taken with this magician of ambiguous status, this magician who may have been light, may have been dark, may have been duped by the darkness while trying to find the light, this magician who is central to the traumas of Europe, committed against the world. It's interesting that the sense I've come to, and it seems like you've come to, Josh, is it's kind of a sense of feeling, a sense of compassion for him, a realization of the victimizer also being a victim. And so that sense is one that, in my healing, I had to apply to my father, to realize one half of the feeling was about cutting the karmic ties between me and the past. The other one was about forgiving my father, really realizing he is a victim of these ancestral traumas, just as much as I and my family was a kind of victim by his addictive behavior. And that's fine. We can have compassion for them. So the sense is that it's not by accident that I was working on this project. This stuff came up about ancestral traumas in my bloodline that I needed to heal from, that I'm carrying these stories. I carried them in my arm. I needed to get them out. I needed to use my voice in this case. So that's where I'm at with it. It's quite a development. I'm really not sure where it could go. I want to do some more investigation into my father's history. I've yet to converse with him about that. Something might come up, something might not. But really, this project, especially working with John Dee, is kind of how to tell the story. My problem is now how to tell the story in a way that my physical body heals, which it is. It is healing. How to tell a story that speaks to the truth and shines a light on it. So that was in 2013. That reading was from 2013. I was reflecting on this experience. I did not deal with that actually until 2020. 7 years passed. 7 years passed. When I was first imprinted by this sense of consciousness, let's say. 7 years passed, and then I started to work with John Dee and his work, like the Monas Hieroglyphica, after those 7 years, much more deeply, in my 37th year, actually. So this guy, Dan Berg, is why I got into it. So I said a prayer to be of service to others at the end of 2020. I said, "Dear universe, I'm sick of pretending I'm not into ET contact. I'm not into angelic contact. I'm sick of working the same sort of job. I want to be of service to others in alignment with my desires and destiny." And so I said that prayer. I was guided. Something said in my ear, Google CE5 Rebel Soak. Follow what's there. I did. I met Dan Berg because of this news story about ice circles. He performed few years back, a CE5. This is a meditation to contact extraterrestrial beings. He said that ice circles appeared. He never saw something, but he got written up in the newspaper, and it's sort of been one thing after another. He now travels the world with Rob Freeman, the UFO world explorer, doing CE5s and like working the cameras and stuff. And he went down to the Atacama Desert, I think in 2019, to have one of these experiences. He has, there's videos of him going out in the desert and coming back and not knowing what's up in terms of what happened in terms of that time. You can get to that at Rob Freeman's video. And I also put together a case study to talk about it. The reason why I'm talking about this is he really does feel as if there are extraterrestrial beings in his aura. And I use psychic words to describe it because it was a psychic experience so palpable that I couldn't deny it. I have recordings of my own, like the journal entry style about these encounters. But I realized that a regression to a missing time experience with psychic, time-traveling extraterrestrial beings wouldn't necessarily be working with physical memory, and that potentially it could be a psychic communion with those beings as such. So I needed to really get into, I needed to understand, I needed to develop the power and energy and capacity within myself to support that space. And that involved reopening the doors to this project, the John Dee Project. From there, Dan, we did the regressions, the case studies about it. We had this experience up on Sail Mountain. It was great. We had a weekend time. We saw some stuff fly in the sky, that sort of thing. But I had an experience there where everyone left the campground. I sat down in meditation and I started meditating on things, primarily the experience of Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly. At that time of meditation, my wife saw a Tic Tac UFO go across the sky with two other witnesses. They called for me. I didn't hear it. When they got back, they told me the story. "Hey, we saw a Tic Tac UFO." I said, "Oh my gosh, why didn't you call me?" They said, "We did. You didn't hear it or didn't respond." I said, "How could that be possible? I'm like 50 feet away or 100 feet away. I should have heard you. I should have seen it." And I realized I was deeply in meditation, that I was encountering a wisdom that I say it has a frequency of John Dee. They told me to do specific things, which was talk to Dan about the experience. They provided an understanding. The understanding essentially was that there was a past life resonance, the resonance between me and John Dee. I'm not saying it's past life, like it's my past life or whatever. I'm saying they said there's a strong resonance. It's very relevant. You can think of yourself as John Dee, Dan Berg as Edward Kelly. Look to the history and you'll make sense of this experience now. And so that's what I did. That's what I did. At the same time as well, again, I was triggered by Marshall V. and Summers. I talked a little bit about this, but this is sort of coincidence happening. It all happened within the container of the Making Contact Convergence, which was a bringing together of many thought leaders about contact, primarily responding to the Pentagon disclosures. So Marshall V. and Summers, he's an angelic channel claiming to be a prophet. He says there's an extraterrestrial intervention happening in the world. People are being taken. Human freedom is under threat. They're here to subjugate the human family, occupy the world, poison the well. No one's going to intervene. There's great darkness, blah, 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 sort of thing. And it was just so triggering because this is absolutely not my experience in actually and truly relating to telepathic extraterrestrial beings is really not the experience. So I thought, how is this even possible? And so this is the fuel of, this sort of alien threat narrative is why, in part, why I have the courage to approach the blood infection, to approach the John Dee life, just because I don't want to live in this world. I choose not to live in this world. And actually, I want to live in a world where every single being in that world feels that they are empowered to make contact with angelics themselves, that they do not have to listen to angry white men to tell them what their God says. Let's let that go, and let's work with material that empowers you to know your own truth, to discover your own truth, that empowers your own discernment, that says you can communicate with angels. You don't need to revere anyone as a prophet. You yourself are a sufficient prophet, to a sufficient communicator with the divinity in the world, with extraterrestrial forces. You yourself can make contact. You do not have to listen to angry white men anymore. This is the message that I want to say as a somewhat passionate younger white man or whatever. So that's the message I want to give, because I'm actually sick, literally, truly sick of the empire that we're living in. Like literally and truly, that's what the infection taught me. Anyways, so I went ahead, I go, okay, let's dive into it. I had the regression with this woman, Sonia, who's a brilliant hypnotist. She's who I turn to for the past life experience. She has had a historical past life as Montgomery Clift, the like a Broadway early golden age of cinema star. So she kind of knew what I was talking about, because there was this, like, reading into John Dee's work, it's just like hard to do because of the resonance. We get to an understanding here, like I tune into it. They're not consistent. The regression is not consistent. It says, yes, I was. There's paradoxes in it. I can't take it at face value. You shouldn't either. But there's material there that's interesting, that inspired this work. And that's what I have to say around that. They said at one point, yeah, you are John Dee, but I kind of think it's everyone's John Dee at this point, to be honest, in that I am carrying the story, the connection, the karmic resonance, primarily because I'm willing to speak about the challenges of empire. And that's the thing that I take away from this regression. The other thing was specific instructions to do the ritual of celestial communication. They said, do it before the winter solstice of 21. So finish by 12/21/21. And so I did. And the reason why, and so I said, okay, this is so complex. I need to understand geometry. I need to understand all these things. So I put together a study group, the John Dee, the Monas Hieroglyphica, Sacred Geometry, and Extraterrestrial, Extra-Dimensional Contact Study Group. And I said, join me in an adventurous study of the Monas Hieroglyphica and the Enochian system of magic by the Renaissance scholar, alchemist, and visionary, Dr. John Dee. As we will discover together, the historical rituals of Dee and Kelly serve as the fulcrum for the Archimedean lever that open cosmic veils and ushers in a golden age of celestial contact. We will meet over Zoom. This is an advanced study group in which all are welcome. And so the rest of this presentation is going through the material we did. Primarily because this is the context that I said, hey, this is the context that needs to be expressed in the ritual, that you need to understand before you engage with the ritual. That was for me. I wasn't sure I was going to do the ritual, to be honest. I came to a decision point about halfway through. And even here, I had no idea that angels were involved. And I just thought maybe extraterrestrials in the guise of angels was the sort of hypothesis I had. So the outline of this study group, we had nine sessions. We had an introduction. The second one was Contact and Magic in the Ancient World. Then John Dee and the Revelation of Enochian Magic. Western Magic after Dee. Sacred Geometry. The Monas Hieroglyphica and the Philosopher's Stone. Decoding the Monas and Beyond. Extra-dimensional and extraterrestrial contact. And healing the apocalypse, because that's really what this is about. We want to heal from the apocalyptic qualities of empire, and we want to embrace the apocalyptic qualities of opening veil for celestial and cosmic communication. So let's get into it. From here on out, I will be reading quotes and snippets from each of the sessions. And so this is a way for you to kind of tune into the flavor of the inquiry without having to do the tremendous amount of reading that we all did to participate in the group. This year is from the Exo Studies Institute. This is a paper called Our Wild Cosmos. It's put out by a graduate of CIIS, California Institute of Integral Studies, from the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness Department. He's a PhD from there. So that's kind of a sister program to the East-West Psychology program. I like this paper a lot because it sets a really good context for how to relate to the strange aspects of contact. Like, we have UFOs in the sky, but we also have psychic dream contact. We also have angel magic or whatever. So we live in a big, weird multiverse, a wild cosmos, one that is ontologically weird, not just epistemologically weird. There are all kinds of experiences and realities that do not fit easily into the story of science we have collectively held so dear for more than 300 years. Contemporary scientists are all too often like medieval astronomers, adding more and more epicycles, circular planetary orbits, to their celestial maps in order to preserve the Ptolemaic model of geocentric solar system, and they continue to do so in the face of a growing body of contradictory and anomalous data. What William James called wild facts and Charles Fort called damned facts, both James and Fort were using their respective terms to refer to those pesky paranormal data points that threaten to undermine present models of reality and destabilize our current system of science. Facts that are easy and necessary to ignore to maintain the illusion that we understand reality. We need a whole new heliocentric cosmology that can more eloquently and accurately account for the wide range of exophenomena, i.e. anomalous, Fortean, extra-dimensional, and paranormal realities documented in the academic, ufological, and esoteric literature. We need a new post-material, post-positivist scientific vision and method that has room for wild facts and damned facts alike and can help us investigate a rigorous philosophic, psychologically, and empirical way the many realities that lie beyond the register of our five senses or technological extensions. And so if you're interested in those pesky facts, I talk a lot about the pesky facts of dreaming and psi phenomenon. And so when you actually look at it, it looks like we are engaged in widespread contact, psychic contact with non-human intelligences through dreams. Anyways, the next thing I want to bring forward is Beyond UFOs. This comes from the Dr. Edgar Mitchell's Foundation for the Research of Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences. And so you can get the first half of the book from Ray Hernandez, the director of FREE and CCRI, the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute, just by sending an email to info@experiencer.org. They did a study, a statistical study of more than 4,000 individuals who have seen UAPs and UFOs and have also had contact with non-human intelligences. And they summarize the findings here. Even though initially 37% viewed their experiences as highly negative, eventually the overwhelming number of contact experiences concluded that their contact experiences are mainly positive, between 85 to 95% depending on the question asked. While all experiencers of our survey have both seen UFOs and have had various types of contact with non-human intelligence, the vast majority actually saw physical entities. We found that the contact experience is overwhelmingly not a physical material phenomenon, instead primarily a paranormal or psychic phenomenon. Third point, the contact experience is an overwhelmingly positive, transformative experience. For the vast majority, you start as a caterpillar and you finish as a butterfly, even though a small percentage are still traumatized by their experiences. And fourth, contact involves a manipulation of space-time, and this in turn leads one to hypothesize that this non-human intelligence might be multidimensional. All right. So then we look at the John Dee and the Empire of Angels, put up by Jason Louv, who is a recent scholar and magician and has studied Buddhism and stuff. He used Philip K. Dick as one of his quotes in the beginning of the book, which made me very appreciative of his work. So he writes, between 1582 and 1589, two men, Dr. John Dee, a mathematician and scientific advisor to Elizabeth I, and Edward Kelly, an itinerant psychic, claimed that they held regular conversation with angels. These angels explained the true origins of humanity and delivered the original language spoken by mankind before the fall. This language, along with a mathematically complex system for making further contact with the angels, was to be used by Dee and Kelly to advance the world towards the apocalypse. This was not a marginal event. Indeed, it has been central to the last 500 years of Western civilization. Through Dee, who invented the phrase British Empire and worked to manifest a new Christian religion uniting all humanity in preparation for the Second Coming, we can find the genesis not only of the British but also the American Empire. And in the utterance of the angels, we can find the spiritual blueprint that has driven them both. This tremendous, albeit occulted, impact on history did not end with Dee. The influence of Dee and the angelic system he and Kelly delivered to the world can be found in an astonishing number of the modern turning points of Western history since Dee's death, in the birth of modern science, in the creation of the secret societies that liberalized Europe and gave America its spiritual calling, in the creation of the State of Israel, in its subsequent centrality to the American foreign policy, and even in the genesis of the United States space program. Let's turn to, so that was a really great reading. Please check out his book. It's really big, and it's a really kind understanding, and provides you a great history as to who John Dee is and what happened. I think it's one of the best books about John Dee so far. The next book I want to talk about is Enochian Vision Magic by DuQuette, who is a practicing magician. he wrote this book. It's sort of like a guidebook for Enochian magic. It's one of the clearest presentations of what Enochian magic is and how to do it. So this is from his introduction. Whenever I visit London, I never fail to make a pilgrimage to the temple of history that is the British Museum. In my opinion, it is holy ground, a time machine, a vortex of human consciousness, and the material showcase of the Akashic records. I love it all, especially the endless low-hanging catacombs of the basement. I am particularly drawn to the Greek and Roman antiquities. The Babylonian and Assyrian exhibits are so monumentally awe-inspiring, they haunt my dreams for months after my visits. But as much as I am drawn to the ancient stuff, I linger longest gazing upon a modern collection of artifacts from the more recent Elizabethan period of English history, an elaborately inscribed wax disc about 9 inches in diameter and several smaller versions of the same, a beautiful gold medallion about 3 inches in diameter, and a black obsidian mirror mounted in an upholstered carrying case. It is in the mid-1980s, when I first came upon them, they were identified simply as magical objects of Dr. John Dee, circa 1583. And they were tucked inconspicuously among furnishings and small household items of the period. In the years that followed, the collection moved several times, each time to more conspicuous displays. The articles now rest in a prominent display case of their own in the center of a first-floor gallery. It seems that interest in John Dee and his celebrated status as a mathematician, international spy for Queen Elizabeth I, and model for Shakespeare's Prospero has grown in the past 30 years. So that's from Enochian Vision Magic. So check that book out if you want to learn how to practice actually Enochian Vision Magic. Continuing on, these items, which should be familiar to anyone who is remotely interested in Enochian magic, are key elements and souvenirs of the most amazing magical adventure ever recorded. A beeswax sigillum de Ameth, the design of which displays in figures and letters an angelic hierarchy of heaven. The golden talisman, the design of which is a graphic index of a great table, home to an angelic chain of command that forms the structure of existence itself. The black obsidian magic mirror that served as Dee and Kelly's angelic viewing screens for nearly 3 years of meticulously recorded magical visions. I sometimes wonder if John Dee and Edward Kelly ever gazed into that dark mirror and peered 400 years into the future, a future when their audacious efforts to tap the mind of God and communicate with angels would be studied, debated, analyzed, and imitated by magicians and spiritual adventurers the world over, a time when their attempts to directly assail the gates of heaven would be seriously examined, not as naive and superstitious, Bible-inspired pretensions, but as serious psychodramatic techniques to access and exploit quantum levels of human consciousness. And I enjoy a certain fantasy in terms of John Dee's life. There are like 18 years or something where he was like this preacher after all the spy stuff, after all the Enochian stuff, where he's everyone says he lived in poverty. What a sad life. And at the end of his life, but he ended up being like warden of a church, and so he's like doing churchy stuff. And I kind of think that, and he worked with another scryer actually. So, but none of those records survive. So in my own fantasies, I think of him as performing these sort of backwards and forwards in time kind of contemplations during those years, and that there will be actually some when the time is right in our historical unfolding of these things, that the records of those 18 years will be revealed. And we often wonder, well, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but in terms of the Bard Code, Alan Green has put forward, there is actually a mysterious tome in a church pointed to by the codes Dee put into Shakespeare's work. So I don't know. Anyways, that's a bit of a side. Let's get back to reading because we've got a lot to do. All right. So Dolores Cannon's in the introductory section. The reason why she's here is because she did amazing work with quantum healing. And quantum healing is hypnosis that puts you into a very deep state of relaxation where you can access these quantum realms, meaning it steps outside of space-time in the way we know it. And she is the reason why I was actually looking into John Dee, why I got inspired by hypnotism, because she was at the forefront of communication with extra-dimensional beings that could bring forward knowledge in the world. And so her work is very important to understand. And it's important to understand, too, because this is something like what John Dee and Edward Kelly did. Dee was something like a hypnotist. Kelly was something like a hypnotee, and they had interactions with angels. This is literally what happens in quantum healing, but we don't use magic mirrors or something like that. So this book, this is from the Convoluted Universe, book 2. She's talking about her technique. So I had to invent my own technique. So I soon found that most of what is taught in traditional hypnosis is unnecessary. So I began to remove some of these steps and substitute quicker methods. As long as the person is not being harmed, I believe the hypnotist can experiment to find out what works and what does not. After all, in the beginning, someone somewhere had to discover how to create the most effective trance state. I knew I was blazing new ground, entering new territory. Now, after almost 30 years of honing and perfecting my technique, I developed my own method. I like to work in the somnambulistic trance state, which is the deepest possible trance state, because I believe that is where all the answers lie. Many hypnotists will not work there because they say strange things happen there. They certainly do. Anyone who has read my books know that strange things do indeed happen there. Most hypnotists are trained to keep the client at lighter states of trance. In that level, the conscious mind is very active and often interferes and interjects. Some information can be obtained at that level, but not the complete cooperation of the subconscious mind that occurs at the somnambulistic level, where conscious mind interference is removed. The person normally does not remember anything and thinks they merely fell asleep. The normal odds are that 1 out of 20 or 30 people will automatically and spontaneously go into the somnambulistic state of trance. But in the technique I developed, the opposite of true. 1 out of 20 or 30 will not go. So it is a very effective method of removing the conscious mind and allowing the subconscious to find the answers. This is the method I teach now in my hypnotherapy classes, and my students are reporting the same amazing results. In my technique, I have the best results by contacting what I call the subconscious mind. At a crucial point in the session, after the subject has located the past life that holds the answers to the problems in the present life, I then ask to speak to the person's subconscious. It always answers and gives the desired information. In traditional hypnosis, the practitioner is taught how to receive answers from the subconscious by use of hand signals. This is where they ask the person to raise one finger for yes and another for no. To me, this is extremely slow and very limited. Why use this method when you can speak directly to the subconscious and will answer you verbally? With my method, you can converse and have a two-way conversation with it, and you can find the answers to absolutely everything you want to ask. By the way, she had a conversation with Nostradamus, and this is really interesting. Nostradamus had a magic cup he would gaze into that was coated by a black substance. Candace Craw Goldman in the study group shared a story that Dolores was able to ask Nostradamus where he got all of his predictions, and he said spirits from the future. So that sense of communication between these two time periods really, by way of a black substance, right? Like black substance, like in the show Stone, the obsidian mirror. It's very similar, and so this is another reason why this is coming into the conversation. So now we're in the section Contact and Magic before Dee. This is the second session of the study group. We looked at the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is literally where the term Enochian comes from. This is Enochian kind of refers to this to say, hey, all the angels that were referred to in this book, they are the Enochian angels. This is literally where the angels of the directions come from, Metatron, Uriel, that sort of thing. A lot of that is defined here in this book of the Bible, which is deemed apocryphal outside of Ethiopia. But it's important to know because we might call upon Gabriel or Raphael or Uriel or Michael, and half of those guys aren't even defined in the Protestant Bible. So I wanted to just read a little bit here. This is from chapter 6. I believe this is called the Book of the Watchers. This is the first book. And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied in those days and were born unto them and comely daughters, and beautiful and comely daughters, and the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Semyaze, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath and bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200 who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And these are the names of their leaders, and I won't read those. These are their chiefs of 10. And then now chapter 7, and all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one, and they began to go out unto them and defile themselves with them, and they taught them charms and enchantments and the cuttings of roots, and made them acquainted with plants, and they became pregnant, and they bare great giants whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. They began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. So that's the book of Enoch. And then it tells the story of Enoch going up and having adventures very similar. This might be one of the original sort of abduction tales, let's say. We looked at Plato in this session primarily because later on we'll see that John Dee called Plato Divine Plato. He loved Plato, it seemed like. And the Phaedo is really important. It's a dialogue on the soul. And it really is, it's important to call out because we shift from logical discourse here to something like mythology. And this shift needs to be well understood because it is coming from the foundation of Western philosophy, Socrates. And it's really important to know that he turned to mythos, the spoken word about the more spiritual or otherworldly aspects of the soul, and logic did not serve. That is primarily because the logic lives at the one layer within the conscious mind, and there's the subconscious and superconscious that lives over it. So we might even call the realm of contact with extraterrestrial beings irrational or transcendent, primarily because it steps up and out of that logic. So here in the Phaedo by Plato, yes, Timaeus, replied Socrates, that is well said. And more than that, first principles, even if they appear certain, should be carefully considered. And when they are satisfactorily ascertained, with a certain hesitating confidence in human reason, you may, I think, follow the course of the argument. And if this is clear, then will be no need for any further inquiry. That, he said, is true. But then, oh my friends, he said, if the soul is really immortal, what care should be taken of her, not only in respect of the portion of time which is called life, but of eternity? And the danger of neglecting her from this point of view does indeed appear to be awful. If death had only been the end of all, the wicked would have had a good bargain in dying, for they would have been happily quit not only of their body, but of their own evil together with their souls. But now, as the soul plainly appears to be immortal, there is no release or salvation from evil except the attainment of the highest virtue and wisdom. For the soul, when on her progress to the world below, takes nothing with her but nurture and education, which are indeed said greatly to benefit or greatly injure the departed, and at the very beginning of its pilgrimage in the other world. For after death, as they say, and that phrase, as they say, is really important here, the genius of each individual to whom he belonged in life leads him to a certain place in which the dead are gathered together for judgment, whence they go into the other world below, following the guide who is appointed to conduct them from this world to the other. And when they have there received their due and remained their time, another guide brings them back after many revolutions of ages. So we also looked at the Meno, which is important to understand. This helps us understand how to relate to geometry. And so the Meno is really a dialogue about geometry and epistemology and understanding. And here's a very simple quote. "We do not learn in that what we call learning is only a process of recollection." Right? So we are recollecting what the soul, the immortal soul, has experienced in the realm of forms, or perhaps, before, or something like that. So when we go, oh, okay, a triangle is shaped this way, we go, oh, we're recollecting it from that other world. So that's the understanding here. Then we also looked at the Timaeus, which is important because it relates the understanding of sacred geometry with cosmology, and it is also important because it relates us to a greater discourse of alternative history, aka Atlantis. So this is kind of important, and these are all dialogues I believe that John Dee has read and understood, and these are some of the reasons why he might be calling Plato divine Plato in his preface to Euclid. So here we have Timaeus, and I'll just read it. "O Solon, Solon, you Hellenes are never anything but children, and there is not an old man among you." Solon in return, who is like an old guy, an elder in the Greeks, Solon in return asked him what he meant. "I meant to say," he replied, "that," oh, by the way, this dialogue's happening between, I believe Solon, this is one of Solon's grandkids or nephews or whatever, telling a story that Solon told him about his time in Egypt talking to an old priest. And so the priest here is saying, "I mean to say," he replied, "that in mind you are all young. There is no old opinion handed down among you by ancient tradition, nor any science which is hoary with age. And I will tell you why. There have been many, and will be again, many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water, and other lesser ones by innumerable other causes. There is a story which even you have preserved, that once upon a time Phaedo, the son of Helios, have yoked the steeds in his father's chariot, because he was not able to drive them in the path of his father, burnt up all that was upon the earth, and was himself destroyed by a thunderbolt. Now this has the form of a myth, but really signifies a declination of the bodies moving in the heavens around the earth, and a great conflagration of things upon the earth, which recurs after long intervals. At such times those who live upon the mountains and in the dry and lofty places are more liable to destruction than those that dwell by the rivers or on the seashore. And from this calamity the Nile, who is our never-failing Savior, delivers and preserves us. When, on the other hand, the gods purge the earth with a deluge of water, the survivors in your country are herdsmen and shepherds who dwell on the mountains. But those who, like you, live in cities are carried by rivers into the sea, whereas in this land neither then nor at another time does water come down from above on the fields, having always a tendency to come up from above, for which reason the traditions preserved here are the most ancient. The fact is that wherever the extremities of winter frost or of summer does not prevent, mankind exists, sometimes in greater and sometimes lesser numbers. So next comes the way of Hermes. This is from the Corpus Hermeticum. Hermes is often called Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Hermes. He is an expression of Thoth, the civilizing god And so this is important to connect with the Book of Enoch, because we have the story of the civilizing beings that also brought forth the giants that taught things like cuttings of roots and things like that. Here, Hermes is talking to his son, Asclepius. So Asclepius says, "What then is God?" And Hermes says, "Not any one of these is he, for he it is that causeth them to be, both all and each and everything of all that are. Nor hath he left a thing besides that is not, but they are all from things that are, and not from things that are not. For that the things that are not, have naturally no power of being anything, but naturally have the power of the inability to be. And conversely, the things that are have not the nature of some time not being." Asclepius says, "And what sayest thou ever then God is?" Hermes says, "God therefore is not mind, but the cause that is that the mind is. God is not spirit, but the cause that spirit is. God is not light, but cause that the light is. Hence one should honor God with these two names, the Good and Father, names which pertain to him alone and no one else." The last text that we will consider in terms of Contct and Magick prior to Dee is that of Agrippa, Cornelius Agrippa. This was a text that Dee held on his desk oftentimes, and he wrote the 3 books of Magick. So here's just a quote. If you really want a sense of practical magic and understanding about how Dee was thinking about magic, really Agrippa's a great place to go. And otherwise, please do check out the Stenographia. I forget who wrote that, but Stenographia, that's a spirit communication in cryptology text. Anyways, Agrippa, magic is a faculty of wonderful virtue, full of most high mysteries, containing the most profound contemplation of most secret things, together with the nature, power, quality, substance, and virtue thereof, as also the knowledge of whole nature. And it doth instruct us concerning the differing and agreement of things amongst themselves, which it produces its wonderful effects, by uniting the virtues of things through the application of them to one another. And so there's kind of a reference to the doctrine of correspondence. So this is the doctrine that causes doll magic to work, like the voodoo doll magic. So you make something like something else. So this correspondence. This is why we talked about the Hermetic stuff. This is why we're talking about Plato, because there's a celestial world, a world of forms, a true world that is expressed through these different ways. And if you have the capacities to create likenesses with intention of this frequency or virtue or whatever, and do something to it, as within, so without, sort of things happen. So that's the understanding. That's why the ensigns of creation and the other things that are placed upon the holy table of practice might be effective. We also covered sacred geometry here in the group, and we had one geometry per session. The introduction, we covered the postulates of Euclid. So if you're interested, please do check that out. I would say that any understanding of John Dee and his work or the Magick requires a geometric understanding. Although I'm not quite there yet. I'm inviting a sense of appreciation simply by offering these forms. So this is the tetrahedron. Now let's get to John Dee and the revelation of Enochian magic. So John Dee wrote a handful of books, mostly mathematical in nature. He wrote the Monas Hieroglyphica, and then I believe for a while he didn't write anything, but he kept spirit diaries. He would write down exactly what happened. Not exactly. I mean, he was a spy, so he kept a fake book and a real book, and we don't know. It's really hard to tell. Half these things have false things in them, So take everything with a grain of salt. Use your own personal discernment. But he wrote them out in the spirit diaries. Actually, there's an interesting story I'll get to when we talk about the true and faithful relation But these 5 books of mystery are put out. I would say this is a very accessible version of the Spirit Diaries. And I want to talk about, I'm reading this primarily because this is the first interaction with a man named Edward Talbot, who is actually Edward Kelly. So I'm just reading this. This is from 5 books of mystery that are transcriptions or transliterations of the Spirit Diaries of John Dee. So Dee, who is the Delta here, that's how he would often describe his name, Delta being the Greek letter for D. He says, one Mr. Albert Talbot came to my house, and being willing and desirous to see or show something in spiritual practice, would how me to how do something therein. And I truly excuse myself therein, as not in the vulgarly accounted magic, neither studied nor exercised, but confess myself long time to how been desirous to help in my philosophical studies through the company and information of the blessed angels of God. And thereupon I brought forth to him my stone in the frame. So this should be the showstone, which was given me of a friend. And I said unto him that I was credibly informed that to it, after a sort, were answerable Alci Angeli Boni. So those are, it's like good angels. And also that I was one willed by a scryer to call for the good angel Anchor to appear in that stone in my own sight. And therefore I desired to call him, and if he would, Anchor and Anlios likewise accounted good angels, for I was not prepared thereunto, etc. He then settled himself to the action, and his knees at my desk, setting the stone before him, fell into prayer and entreaty, etc. In the mean space I in my oratory did pray and make motion to God, and he his good creatures for the furthering of this action, and within 1/4 of an hour or less he had sight of one in the stone, but he still expected for 2 more, deeming this to be one of the 3, namely Anchor, Anachor, or Anlios. But I then came to him to the stone, and after some thanks to God and welcome to the good creature I required to know his name, and he spake plainly to the hearing of E.T., that his name was Uriel. Dee says, are you one of them, said I, John Dee, that are answerable upon due observation performed to this stone? Uriel says, I am. Dee says, are there any more beside you? Michael and Raphael, but Michael est something in Latin. Yes, my book of Soiga is my book of Soiga of any excellency, is what Dee says. And so the book of Soiga is like 30 big pages of just text. And there was a rumor that if you read it, you would die. So he goes, is my book of Soiga of any excellency? And then Uriel answers, it's in Latin. I wish I got a different copy of it. Will you give me instructions? How may I read the tables of Soiga? Uriel says I can, but then Michael could be the interpreter. Uriel says, I was told that after I could read the book that I should live but 2 years and a half. And then Uriel says, thou shalt live 100 and odd years. So there you go. That was the first interaction with Uriel in the Showstone with Edward Kelly. It's about the Book of Soiga. And there was a untrue prediction. So check that out. Live 100 and a half years. Oh, no, he died a little bit less than 100 and a half years. So now let's turn to the true and faithful relation. This text is pretty important. So what happened after John Dee died, he put all of his diaries in the bottom of a trunk. The trunk was then sold in auction and estate sales. It was a hidden compartment. Someone opened up the hidden compartment, opened up the hidden compartment. The nurse or the maid supposedly like baked half of the stuff in pie tins, like lined pie tins. The other half went through and came to I believe it was Elias Ashmole who had the text, and then from there this man named Casaubon wrote A True and Faithful Relation of what passed for many years between Dr. John Dee and some spirits. And so I'll read a little bit from the preface. This is one of the reasons why Dr. John Dee was erased from history for so long, is because of the kind of fundamentalist fear of dark demonic practice. What is here presented unto thee, Christian reader, being a true and faithful relation, etc., as the title beareth, and will be further cleared by this preface, though by the carriage of it in some respects, and by the nature of it too, it might be deemed and termed a work of darkness, yet it is no other than what with great tenderness and circumspection was tendered to men of highest dignity in Europe, kings and princes, and by all, England excepted, lifted unto for a while with good respect, by some gladly embraced and entertained for a long time, the fame whereof being carried unto Rome, it made the Pope to befit himself, not knowing what the event of it might be, and how much of it might concern him, and indeed filled all men, learned and unlearned, in most places with wonder and astonishment, of which things will be showed and made good to the utmost of we have said in the contents of this book by unquestionable records and evidences, and therefore I make no question but there will be men enough found in the world whose curiosity will lead them to read what I think is not to be paralleled in the kind by any book that hath been set out in any age to read, and so on and so forth. So that this is one of the earliest collections of the Spirit Diaries of Dee. Start with the 5 books of mystery, read that a bit, read some other secondary texts, and then come back to this as a source text, as a somewhat of a source text. Because of this material is so complex, I wanted to put forward kind of a reference that's very helpful. This is a very helpful reference. This is from Benjamin Rowe, who was attributed to be have a past life as John Dee, which is very interesting. So he helped put out this. He made a reference. We'll reference Benjamin Rowe a few times in this study experience. And so we've got 3 periods that are important to know about: the Heptarchia Mystica. So this is the magic of the 7, so the 7 planetary spheres and things like that. And then the Liber Logaoth in the Angelic alphabet is period 2, and then period 3 is Enochiana. So we've got different periods of magic that are all kind of coming from angelic communication. The Enochiana comes in the 48 angelic calls. I read I believe the 15th call to you earlier, and that is what forms the basis of both my work in the Book of Galactic Light, of Aleister Crowley's book in the Vision and the Voice, and it forms the celestial scrying ritual. There are sort of other kind of elemental magics that I haven't actually explored, and I'm going to shortly. But so I just wanted to point out this in Benjamin Rowe's Enochian reference, and you can dive into that a bit further as you want. So coming now to Vincent Bridges' work. Vincent Bridges is a really interesting character. I'm actually just reading through this book, one of his books. I read through this a few times. It's still pretty opaque to me. But he has been seen. He held past life memories as Edward Kelly, actually. So there are sort of, and he brought forward practice, actual practice recently, and there's inspired work that's being done now that I'll talk about a bit later. He talks about the Ophanic intelligences. Ophanic refers to the Ezekiel's wheel, that sort of angel of the spiraling eyes. is Ophanic, and that has a vortex quality to it. He uses the word Ophanic to refer to Enochian angels. So the Ophanic intelligence is the sentience of whirling light gave Dr. Dee a powerful tool for leveraging reality. Imagine a magic toolbox, small enough and portable enough to be scattered throughout the galaxy. The toolbox contains tools designed to build a mechanism that functions as a combination radio set, life raft, and emergency medical instrument. Included along with the tools is a DNA trigger coded instruction sheet. Learning the alphabetic waveforms of symmetric set coherent sacred language such as Hebrew, Greek, Sanskrit, etc. creates a stable psychic platform onto which the interlocking non-local dimensional structures of the Ophanic language can be downloaded. This ensures that the toolbox will be opened by someone with the spiritual perspective to use it. The material was originally given to Dee because he could understand and respect the material. Mathers, who was part of the Order of Golden Dawn, was able to expand upon the material for the same reason. Within the last 5 years, certain leaps forward into the understanding of the Ophanic Rescue Project have occurred. They point with eerie synchronicity toward the Enochian material of Dr. Dee. Only now do we begin to see the outlines of the complete system and of what may be intended to accomplish. The starting point is the alphabet itself, arranged in the 64 characters used to spell the title functions of the letters. The alphabet creates a DNA-sensitive matrix. Meditation on this pattern and its evolution into a 16-cell four-dimensional geometric figure, the dual of the hypercube, triggers a DNA-coded process that allows us to emotionally and intellectually grok the Ophanic language. So if that didn't make any sense to you, that's fine. You can work with it. One of the things that is important to understand is in all of this work, there is assistance from these intelligences. And literally when Edward Kelly received the alphabet, he was told to transcribe it. And then he like Dee and the angels were like, study it really well so you can write it in the next session. He didn't. The next session happens, and both Dee and the angels were like, can't you do what? And so the angels come, they blast at Edward Kelly. He says, my head is on fire. And then he's able to write the rest of what he needed to in that communication. In my own experience, the angels have shown up in dreams to communicate with me, to actually help me. I did actually do a scrying session within the last week. I thought I could trick the angels or whatever. I thought I would go, hey, is Enochian really useful? Like, can we move on from it? And they said, absolutely not. It's not exactly what you expect, but it has a vibratory quality that is very important to work with. They told me I don't actually have to understand it quite yet, and that the understanding happens in a transcendent realm as opposed to a historic realm. So that's important to know. So here's the cube. And now we are done with the session on Dee and the revelation of Enochian magic. Let's talk about Western magic after Dee. The sessions kind of circle around. The Vision and the Voice is put out by Aleister Crowley in 1911. This is relevant because it was like 110 years ago. He was a very famous magician. You might understand Crowley to be the great beast or whatever. I was warned against him in the evangelical church. So he did this working, the Vision, the Voice. He got a hold of the, so what happened after, so the Enochian ritual is kind of forgotten about. I believe it was stuck in the Spirit Diary. It goes to Ashmole. Ashmole then publishes it. It's like the true and faithful relation happens. Mathers gets it in the Order of Golden Dawn. They start working with it. Crowley is part of that, but then he leaves. He tries one of the aethers, one or two of the aethers, and was like, wow, this actually works. I think magic mushrooms might have been involved. He goes to some place to do this work. He's working with a transcriber as well. Crowley, by the way, saw himself as the reincarnation of Edward Kelly, so that's pretty interesting to note here too. I'm just putting forward, this is from the scrying of the 30th Aether, that of text. By the way, the Aethers, there's 30 of them. Aether is just a layer. You can think of it as a layer, an onion layer of consciousness of heaven. Is very much similar to like a Swedenborgian type of thing. Or if you're familiar with Robert Monroe and the out-of-body gateway process where you focus 1, 2, 3, 4. This is, I think, something like that. So anyways, let's just read the text just to get its flavor. I am in a vast crystal cube in the form of the great god Harpocrates. This cube is surrounded by a sphere. About me are 4 archangels in black robes, their wings and armor lined out in white. In the north is a book on whose back in front are A, M, B, Z in Enochian characters. Within it is written, I am, the surrounding of the 4. Lift up your heads, O houses of eternity, for my Father goeth forth to judge the world. One light, let it become 1,000, and one sword 10,000, that no man hide him from my Father's eye in the day of judgment of my God. Let the gods hide themselves. Let the angels be troubled and flee away. For the eye of my Father is open, and the book of the aeons is fallen. Arise, arise, arise. Let the light of the sight of time be extinguished. Let the darkness cover all things. For my Father goeth forth to seek a spouse, to replace her who is fallen and defiled. Seal the book with the seals of the stars concealed, for the rivers have rushed together in the name. We've got the Yod-He Vah-He name is broken in 1,000 pieces against the cubic stone. Tremble ye, O pillars of the universe, for eternity is in travail of a terrible child. She shall bring forth a universe of darkness, whence shall leap forth a spark that shall put his father to flight. The obelisks are broken, the stars have rushed together, the light hath plunged into the abyss, the heavens are mixed with hell. My Father shall not hear their noise, his ears are closed, his eyes are covered with the clouds of night. The end, the end, the end, for the eye of Shiva hath opened, the heaven is naked before him, for the aeons of Saturn leans towards the bosom of death. So that was the vision of the voice. Now let's turn to some of the work. Benjamin Rao, he was from, I believe, last century, the first half of the 1900s. He wrote a lot about it. He's the one that put together probably the most coherent reference, actually, outside of DuQuette's recent work. He wrote a series of papers. This one's called The Lotus of the Temple. In the supplemental papers to Enochian temples, I briefly mentioned using the temple as a gate through which the magician can come in contact with extraterrestrial or extrasolar realms. This paper provides more details on the method. A series of example visions using the technique are published separately. The visualized structure of the temple serves as an anchor for the forces of an Enochian tablet. It holds them in a specific relationship to each other. Their interactions produce fields of magical forces around the temple, which are the major source of its effectiveness. The exact shape of these fields can be changed, and the altars composed of the forces of subservient angels are the means of producing that change. When the altars are positioned in their quarters inside the temple, the generated fields follow the shape of the temple closely. Beginning at the circle where the curtains of the seniors meet the ground, the field bulges outwards slightly around the lower temples as they move upwards. Then they curve inward again, roughly following the line of the roof and the pillar of the king's name, ending in a small opening just above the level of the sphere created with the 3 names of God. The overall shape is much like that of a closed, slightly bulbous flower bud. In this shape, the fields serve to insulate the temple, keeping the accumulated power inside. Additional power enters through the temple opening at the top and is held within. So I just wanted to give you a flavor of how these people are relating to Enochian works. This was used in Contact with Extraterrestrials, so you can check that out. Again, there are many different interpretations to what the Enochian system is. There's a sense of energetic, there's a sense of visionary stuff, there's a sense of communication. It depends on who you are and what you're working with. So I want to talk about Vincent Bridges and Dan Winter. They have a sort of pairing like the Edward Kelly and the John Dee experience, and they talk about the Enochian alphabet here in this video series. This, I believe, was done in Prague, and they talk about language of the angels. And I watched this video series, and I heard vortex beings at the end of it, and sent him a message. Actually, I said, "Oh my God!" Like my wife and I were channeling vortex beings. Like, what's going on? And so since then, I've realized that there are through a lot of the influence here, that the energies are actually these like sort of swirling vortex-like energies. They aren't angelic like we imagine with the wings and things like that. So this is a great video series. I just wanted to call that out. And I've referenced Bridges a few times in the conversation. After Western magic, so there's a few things I want to point out. Theosophy is a religion. So this comes from Wikipedia, but we looked at theosophy because it is actually important. This is a process of almost syncretization. So bringing together these different aspects. It brought, some might say, appropriated some stuff, but it really, like when we talk about the higher self, it's coming through this work. Our notions of psychic stuff and clairvoyance are really defined in part by theosophy. So theosophy here is a religion established in the U.S. during the late 19th century. It was founded primarily by the Russian immigrant Helena Blavatsky, and draws its teachings predominantly from Blavatsky's writings, categorized by scholars of religions as both a new religious movement and as part of the occultist stream of Western esotericism. It draws upon both older European philosophies such as Neoplatonism, Asian religions such as Hinduism and Buddhism. And as presented by Blavatsky, theosophy teaches that there is an ancient and secretive brotherhood of spiritual adepts known as the masters. So again, we have this sense of ascended masters, right? Who, although found around the world, are centered in Tibet. These masters are alleged by Blavatsky to have cultivated great wisdom and supernatural powers. The theosophists believe that it was they who initiated the modern theosophic movements through the disseminating of their teachings via Blavatsky. They believe that these masters are attempting to revive knowledge of an ancient religion once found around the world, and which will again come to eclipse the existing world religions. Theosophical groups, nevertheless, do not refer to their systems as a religion. Theosophy preaches the existence of a single divine absolute. It promotes an emanistic cosmology in which the universe is perceived as outward reflections from this absolute. Theosophy teaches that the purpose of human life is spiritual emancipation, and claims that the human soul undergoes reincarnation upon bodily death according to the process of karma. It promotes values of universal brotherhood and social improvement, although it does not stipulate particular ethical codes. So I talk about this as one expression of magic. We've already talked about like Order of Golden Dawn. We've talked about the OTO with Aleister Crowley. These are Enochian expressions, the OTO and Order of Golden Dawn, as well as Rosicrucianism is very similar, this sort of esoteric practice. Those are understood to come up and out of John Dee. This theosophy, on the other hand, comes from syncretization of the Eastern and Western thought. Generally, we might understand that by way of appropriation nowadays, unfortunately. Another movement that is important to know about when we talk about magic or contact in the Western world is spiritualism. Again, I'm reading from Wikipedia. Spiritualism is a new religious movement based upon the belief that the spirits of the dead exist and have the ability and the necessary means to communicate with the living. The afterlife or the spirit world is seen by spiritualists not as a static place, but as one in which spirits continue to evolve. These two beliefs, that contact with spirits is possible and that spirits are more advanced than humans, lead spiritualists to a third belief, that spirits are capable of providing useful knowledge about moral and ethical issues, as well as about the nature of God. Some spiritualists will speak of a concept which they refer to as spirit guides, specific spirits often contacted who are relied upon for spiritual guidance. Emanuel Swedenborg has some claim to be the father of spiritualism. Spiritism, a branch of spiritualism developed by Kardec and today practiced mostly in Europe and Latin America, emphasizes reincarnation. Spiritualism developed and reaches peak growth in membership from the 1840s to the 1920s, especially in English-speaking countries. By 1897, spiritualism was said to have more than 8 million followers in the US and Europe, mostly drawn from middle and upper classes. Spiritualism flourished for a half century without canonical texts or formalized organization, attaining cohesion through periodicals, tours by trance lecturers, camp meetings, and the missionary activities of accomplished mediums. Many prominent spiritualists were women, and like most spiritualists, supported causes such as abolition of slavery and women's suffrage. By the late 1880s, the credibility of the informal movement had weakened due to accusations of fraud perpetrated by mediums, and formal spiritualist organizations began to appear. Spiritualism is currently practiced primarily through various denominational spiritualist churches in the US, Canada, and UK. So spiritualism is important because this is it's important to know about primarily for two reasons. One, because it's actually like communication and seances, and it's where we get our notions of spirit communication. It's relevant because it informs our understanding in the past of what John Dee did, and it is actually relevant now because I would say that the CE5 movement is something like spiritualism. This sense of being able to contact extraterrestrial beings very much sounds like this, and it, in fact, looks like it from a phenomenological point of view, I would say. So it's and as opposed to manifesting spirits here, we're manifesting ET things and lights in the sky. But there's other phenomena that you can experience with spiritualism. It's relevant too by way of its influence on the Law of One, which we'll talk about shortly. Right now, actually. So the Law of One is very famous channeling from an alleged extraterrestrial source. This is where we get a lot of our notions and a lot of the stuff we talk about. I talk about densities in the Book of Galactic Light. This is where it's coming from. And it comes from a man named Don Elkins, who was contemplating the UFO phenomena and said, hey, I know the spiritualists have this phenomenon called apportation, which is the mysterious teleportation or dematerialization of objects. He goes, what if the UFOs were doing something like that? So in here, this is just a description of that process from the introduction of the Law of One, the raw materials. During this period, Don worked on many peripheral areas of UFO research. I was trying to put the pieces together. One of the great puzzle pieces for us was the question of how UFOs could materialize and dematerialize. The phenomenon seemed to posit a physics which we had not yet grasped, and being capable of using this physics. Don had gone to many seances by himself before I joined him in his research and had very systematically crossed off each name off his list. He was looking for a materialization manifestation, not one he could prove to anyone, but one which he himself could believe. It was his feeling that the materializations which seances manifest were perhaps of the same or similar nature to the materializations of UFOs. Therefore, his reasoning went, viewing personally the mechanisms of materialization and dematerialization in a seance would enable him to hypothesize more accurately concerning UFOs. So from there, he starts experiencing, goes into seances, and he starts working with a channel. This is a description of what the This next text is what the being, the collective, spoke through the channel. And it talks like this: I am Ra, the law of one, though beyond the limitations of name, as you call vibratory sound complexes, may be approximated by stating that all things are one, that there is no polarity, no right, no wrong, no disharmony, but only identity. All is one, and that one is love, light, light, love, the infinite creator. Now getting more into modern days, we've got the remote viewing. Remote viewing is a thing. This is Magick. Again, this is sort of, I bring this up primarily because we are seeing examples of communication with the other world through client practitioner, hypnotist, magician, scryer. In the case of Dee, it was called magical operator and scryer. And in this case, we've got like handler and like a remote viewing psychic. And so the gateway experience that is referenced in this document is put forward by Robert Monroe, who is famous for developing binaural beats, hemisync, that puts you into a state of consciousness where out-of-body experiences can happen, or it facilitates that. And so the Department of Army was looking into that. So he's that in this document. I'll just read a few lines from it because I just wanted to point out that the U.S. government and armies and stuff are looking into it. So you tasked me to provide an assessment of the gateway experience in terms of its mechanics and ultimate practicality. As I set out to fulfill that tasking, it soon became clear that in order to assess the validity and practicality of the process, I needed to do enough supporting research and analysis to understand why or how the process works. Frankly, sir, that proved to be an extremely involved and difficult business. Initially, based on the conversations with a physician who took the gateway training with me, I had recourse to the biomedical models developed by Benthoff to obtain information, and so on and so forth. And it describes, finally, again, found it necessary to use physics to bring the whole phenomenon of out-of-body states into the language of physical science, to remove the stigma of the occult connotations and put it in a frame of reference suited to objective assessment. I referenced Alchemist's Dream is Now Achieved. This is a little book that I wrote and illustrated. So I offer this as just by way of connection in the inquiry. This actually literally does... This book, I wrote a series of about 6 little books that were essentially downloads that I'm from an extra dimensional source or from my higher self or whatever. So I wrote and illustrated these. This Alchemist's Dream talks about how telephones are stand-ins for telepathy, that cars are stand-ins for out-of-body experience, and that we actually do have the potential to transmute the physical poisons within the earth, the base material, into something like a galactic golden age. So this is the last page of it. Once the categories of perception are dissolved, a very interesting configuration of spirit and cosmos remains in experience. The individual retains consciousness and volition. Matter, with its conservation, is sublimated. The inner and outer worlds are united. The agent and arena of action are superimposed. The individual now subsists as causation in a world of formal and spiritual principles of material convolutions. Matter may be transmuted according to intention. The history of our societal and individual sin may be assimilated and then sublimated. The Alchemist's Dream is now achieved. So you can get to that for free on my website, cosmicdreamsanctuary.org. You can also buy it on Amazon. But I invite you to check that out as an example of Western magic after John Dee. Here we've got the octahedron, just inviting a moment of contemplation of that geometric figure, octahedron. Taking a much needed water sip. Thank you for being with me. This is a long inquiry, but I think it's really worthwhile, and it can be a really stand-in for perhaps hundreds of hours of reading these texts, just to flavor them so you understand where we're at historically, philosophically, and spiritually when we engage in this inquiry. All right. The next session is on sacred geometry. So sacred geometry, what is that? It's basically, we worked with that when we were looking at these Platonic solids. That's what we've been looking at: the cube, tetrahedron, octahedron. Those represent different elements, as we'll see. We look to Drunvalo Melchizedek, actually, because he's got a fascinating book, and it's a really wonderful read. And so let's just flavor that. The Merkaba. There's another major factor that's going on that we're going to focus on in this story. 13,000 years ago, we were aware of something about ourselves that we've since completely forgotten. The geometric energy fields around our bodies can be turned on in a particular way, which is also connected to our breath. These fields used to spin at close to the speeds of light around our body, but they slowed down and stopped spinning after the fall. When this field is turned back on and spins, it's called a Merkaba, and its usefulness is in this reality is unparalleled. It gives us an expanded awareness of who we are, connects us with higher levels of consciousness, and restores the memory of the infinite possibilities. A healthy spinning Merkaba is 50 to 60 feet in diameter, proportionate to one's height. The rotation of a spinning Merkaba can be displayed on a computer monitor using appropriate instruments, and its appearance is identical with the infrared heat envelope of the galaxy, the same basic shape as the traditional flying saucer. Interesting. The word Merkaba is made up of three smaller words, Merkaba, which, as we use them, came from ancient Egyptian. It is seen in other cultures as Merkaba, Merkaba, Merkaba. There are several pronunciations, but generally you pronounce it as if the three syllables were separate, with accent on each. Mer refers to a specific kind of light that was understood in Egypt only during the time, etc. It is important to note, right, that where does Merkaba come from? Everyone's talking about Merkaba. You're seeing this thing. You might understand it in terms of Metatron's cube. Where does it actually come from in our New Age movement? Well, Drunvalo Melchizedek seems like the guy where it comes from. However, there is such a thing called Merkaba mysticism that you track it back, and it goes to the work of Rabbi Isaac in the 3rd or 4th century Common Era. And he describes the process of Enoch becoming Metatron. Enoch becoming Metatron. You know of the Merkaba as Metatron's cube. So this is really important to understand. We're connecting all the dots, right? Enochian angels refer to the celestial beings that Enoch interacted with. This is who John Dee thought he was talking about. Enoch goes up to heaven. He becomes Metatron, the archangel. Metatron's cube is the Merkaba, right? So this is all coming together. If you're talking about Merkabas, you need to know about Metatron. You need to know about Enoch. You need to know about John Dee. So that's why I'm talking about it. So we're tuning back to the Timaeus. This is a dialogue now about how this is the cosmology associated with sacred geometry. So he goes through the elements, and I'm just sampling one of the elements for you here and now. So he describes, to earth then let us assign the cubical form, for earth is the most immovable of the 4 elements, and the most plastic of all bodies, and that which has the most stable basis must of necessity be of such a nature. Now of the triangles which we assumed at first, that which has 2 equal sides is by nature more firmly based than that which has unequal sides, and of the compound figures which are formed out of either, the plane equilateral quadrangle has necessarily a more stable basis than the equilateral triangle, both in the whole and in the parts. Wherefore, in assigning this figure to earth, we adhere to the probability. To water, we assign that one of the remaining forms, which is the least movable and the most movable of them, to the fire, and to air, that which is intermediate. And we assign the smallest body to fire, and the greatest to water, and the intermediate in size to air, and again the acutest body to fire, and the next in acuteness to air, and the third to water. Of these elements, that which has the fewest bases must necessarily be the most movable. I believe that would be the tetrahedron associated with the fire. So we also looked at the fractal geometry of nature, primarily because it's interesting, it's beautiful, and it's relevant to the work that Dan Winter, who is in the Bridges Dan Winter combo, that Dee and Kelly. He's the Dee, Bridges is the Kelly. He's an electrical engineer. He we'll get into some of the work he's done, but he's been inspired by the Ophanic connection, and he talks a lot about compressibility and fractal stuff. So it's important to know that the Mandelbrot was the guy that put forward the fractal geometry of nature. This is the book where that knowledge is coming from. So if you're curious about fractals, check that out. And I hope you just appreciate the psychedelic imagery here. Let it open your mind in kind and gentle ways. We looked at crop circles. This is an image that was given to me by the tattoo artist that I worked on. I actually had the Monas hieroglyphica tattooed on my body here to mirror the scar of the infection here, as a way to say, I'm doing this thing because I believe in everyone's capacity to relate to this space, and therefore I believe in my own capacity to confront the darknesses that I might have seen in that infection and in the D lifetime. And so he gave me a bunch of imagery of crop circles that have been compiled. I shared that with the group, but we just considered crop circles, and a really interesting theory came up from my uncle who participated in the group. I love it. I love this theory. Crop circles aren't, they might be coming from below, from the earth consciousness, not from above, right? So they're not, maybe not blasted in, but maybe something happens from below. And so these are just being presented as ways to open the mind, to engage in communication. These are examples of geometric communication. It's relevant because because geometry is actually relevant in the context of Monas hieroglyphica. It's relevant in terms of the actual Enochian language presented. So these are just sort of mind-opening ways to relate to geometric communications with non-human intelligences. And now we've got dodecahedron. All right, beautiful. So we are now talking about the Monas hieroglyphica and alchemy. Monas hieroglyphica, it was this image, this sort of weird, astrological glyph with horns. The preparatory aphorisms are sort of a way to prepare to read the Monas hieroglyphica. All of this stuff is really opaque. So just bear with me as I read some of this text from John Dee. This text is coming from Jim Egan, who is somehow associated with the Newport Tower. The Newport Tower was designed by John Dee. It serves as a camera obscura and is a building in the New World. So check out that information. It's really fascinating. So preparatory aphorisms. 1. Against the laws of reason and nature, God created all things from nothing. Thus, no created thing can ever return to nothing, unless it is done through the supernatural power of God and against the laws of reason and nature. 2. In actuality, if we artfully push nature using the principles of pyronomia, we may produce marvelous metamorphoses. By nature, I mean anything that has been created. 3. Things which are visible and are known to perfection in a certain way in the nature of things are said to exist. But wise men can demonstrate that there are other things which exist in nature's hidden recesses, which act somewhat like seeds. 4. Anything that actively exists sends out its rays in all directions, elegantly filling all the various parts of the universe. Thus, every place in the universe contains rays of all the things that have an active existence. So it's really worth reading. It's kind of joyful and it's kind of opaque. So the way I'm relating to these materials is just sort of spiraling back maybe every few years, and see how my understanding has developed. Now moving to the preface to Euclid. This is a really interesting text. It's really approachable. So if you really are curious about John Dee and his writing and want to get into his writing, please read the preface to Euclid. There's a lot of gems in there. You can feel his personality. You can. It's so tragic almost as this brilliant mind who's bringing the beauty of Euclid, and he loves the contemplation of the geometric forms, the world of eidos, that sort of thing. And then he has to go, oh, by the way, and then you can use it to like build bombs, make parabolas of artillery things, and like define who owns what mine. But he talks about the beauty of geometry, and then kind of layers that with the selling of that geometry to the English nobility who at that time are not appreciative of the more subtle or sophisticated aspects. And so that's a little bit sort of like going, hey, we can contact the UFOs and maybe they'll give us technology to like stop oil, right? Like there's a deeper communication that's much more important than any of the technologies that can happen. So anyways, read that so you can get a sense of how many different dimensions John Dee is writing at when he is writing. So that this is perhaps a Rosetta Stone experience for you to be able to parse that out. So here's from the preface to Euclid by John Dee. There are three general categories of all things which have being: supernatural, natural, and a third kind. Supernatural things are immaterial, simple, indivisible, incorruptible, unchangeable. Supernatural things can only be comprehended by the mind. Natural things are able to be perceived by senses. Natural things can involve probability and conjecture, but supernatural things are the chief demonstration of the most absolute science. By comparing the properties of the two types, we can better describe the state, the condition, and the nature and the property of the third thing I mentioned. The third type is given a special name, mathematical things. They are, in a manner of speaking, in the middle between supernatural and natural things. They are not as absolute and excellent as supernatural things, but not as base and gross as natural things, but they are immaterial, but nevertheless they are somewhat able to be signified by material things. And through their peculiar images and though their peculiar images are aggregable and divisible by art, their general forms are always constant, unchangeable, untransformable, and incorruptible. They cannot at any time be perceived or judged by the senses, but they also can't be considered to have been first conceived in the royal minds of man. Above the imperfection of conjecture, supposing an opinion, yet just below high intellectual conceptualization, are the mercurial fruits of dianetical discourse, the use of reasoning, which exists in perfect imagination. These mathematical things have a marvelous neutrality, yet they also have a strange participation between supernatural, immortal, intellectual, simple, indivisible things, and natural, mortal, sensible, compounded, divisible things. All right. So let's get to the Monas Hieroglyphica, which is really kind of strange. Monas Hieroglyphica, he wrote it really fast. He was very particular about how it was printed. He said he was impressed by this sort of consciousness for 7 years, and when he was 37, he was able to write it and understand it. So it's called the Sacred Symbol of Oneness, John Dee of London, mathematically, magically, kabbalistically, and analogically explained to Maximilian, most wise king of the Romans, Bohemia, and Hungary, aka the Holy Roman Emperor. Theorem 1. The very first and most simple representation of not only existing things, but also things hidden in the folds of nature, and also in the exhibition of the bringing forth of light, is made by means of a straight line and a circle. Theorem 2. However, a circle cannot be skillfully crafted without the line. Likewise, the line cannot be crafted without the point. Thus, things come into being by way of the point and a monad. And things related to the circumference, regardless of how big they may be, cannot exist without the service of this central point. Theorem 3, thus the central conspicuous point of the hieroglyphic monad refers to the earth, around which both the sun as well as the moon and the rest of the planets complete their courses. And in this gift, since the sun possesses greatest dignity because of its excellence, we represent it by a complete circle with a visible center. So this little glyph has a lot of alchemical symbology as well as astrological symbology placed in it, and you can work with dividing it in many different ways. And it also forms a geometric pattern which can be overlaid upon that 5-7 pattern of the sigillum de Ameth. And he says you can do all sorts of stuff with it in your mind. It's like the end all be all of like mental imagery. It's really interesting. He's explained it to Elizabeth I. He explains it in person to people. So this is a sense of an exoteric text. This is completely incomprehensible without the esoteric understanding or the initiation into the knowledge of what it is. We looked at Carl Jung, because it's really, he talks about alchemy in a way of psychology, which is really relevant for nowadays. The invitation, however, just like, so Carl Jung as well talked about UFOs psychologically. So understanding that them UFOs, flying saucers, as a psychological experience. Jung actually had all sorts of contact with non-human intelligences. He would speak to his pots and pans. They would respond with their behavior sometimes. So it's important to know that for him, psychologically doesn't mean fantastical or imaginal, but rather it is based in psychology, the psyche, expressions of psyche. So the invitation here is to use Jung to understand the way of alchemy as a journey of soul, but also to remember that quite literally these men were alchemists and quite literally probably did affect magical transmutations that are unexplained. So we should take testimony as we can receive it, and it's hard to relate to some of the testimony of John Dee and Kelly, primarily because there are issues that require our discernment. Anyways, let's get into Carl Jung so you get a flavor of Carl Jung and alchemy. When the alchemist speaks of Mercurius, on the face of it, he means quicksilver, mercury, but inwardly he means the world-creating spirit concealed or imprisoned in matter. The dragon is probably the oldest pictorial symbol in alchemy of which we have documentary evidence. It appears as the Ouroboros, the tail-eater, in the Codex Marcianus, which dates from the 10th or 11th century, together with the legends of the One, the All. Time and again, the alchemists reiterate that the opus proceeds from the One and leads back to the One, that it is a sort of circle, like a dragon biting its own tail. For this reason, the opus was often called circular, or else rota, the wheel. Mercurius stands at the beginning and end of the work. He is the prima materia, the caput cavore, the negrido, that as dragon he devours himself, and as dragon he dies, to rise again in the lapis. He is the play of colors in the cauda pavonis and the division into the four elements. He is the hermaphrodite that was in the beginning, that splits into the classical brother-sister duality and is reunited in the conjunctivo. It appears to appear again at the end in the radiant form of the lumen novum, the stone. He is metallic yet liquid, matter yet spirit, cold yet fiery, poison and yet healing draught, a symbol uniting all of the opposites. So that's Carl Jung's Psychology and Alchemy. the book. This reading is from a posthumous work by Vincent Bridges, put out by Terry Burns, and I believe Bridges' fiance or wife. It's called The Alchemical Enigma. Bridges died in a very, very interesting way. This text was sent to me by Dan Winter. Bridges had past life memory as Edward Kelly. He ended up living in Kelly's tower, the tower in Prague, I believe, where Kelly lived. What was it called? The donkey. It was the cradle and the donkey. Yeah, like a baby was crying during Kelly's alchemical ritual, so he transformed him into a donkey. I guess that legend was before Kelly, but the Kelly and Bridges really liked it, so they sort of enjoyed it. Bridges wrote a play about a woman named the Dark Lady, who was associated with the Shakespeare experience. It's important to know that Dee and Kelly and probably several others had a conspiracy or like worked with Shakespeare in some way, shape, or form, and the evidence is going to be shown later. But so there was a Dark Lady that somehow involved with Shakespeare. Anyways, he's writing a play by it, and he says something that in the play that kind of upset the ghost of Kelly. This is what Vincent Bridges said, and was pushed down the stairs or something by the spirit of Kelly and died, actually. And how unfortunate, right? Like that's, I mean, it's a very tragic experience, but also very poetical and narrative in nature. And I still think about it. Dan Winter sent it to me primarily because I had a conversation with him before doing the celestial ritual, and he said, "Be careful! Like, don't upset the spirit of Dee. Look what happened to Bridges." And so, anyways, we've got. I'll just read it, and just so you know, this is from the perspective of Kelly. Primarily, it's really, really important to understand that the understanding we have of Kelly as a charlatan, as a fraud with his ears cut off, as a counterfeiter, may or may not be true, in that in the continental history and understanding of alchemy, Kelly was much more revered than can be expected. He did rise to knighthood, so that's what's talked about here. So anyways, Edward Talbot Kelly steps from obscurity onto the stage of Elizabethan era on 8th of March, 1582, arriving at Mortlake in answer to the fervent prayers of Dr. John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's mentor, court astrologer, creator of the idea of the British Empire, and reputably the most learned man in Europe. Dr. Dee, as Christopher Marlowe, who will show up at the end of this experience, would attribute to Dr. Faustus, had come to the end of human knowledge and longed for what he saw as a higher form of learning, communication with the angelic realms. Like the biblical patriarch Enoch, he wanted to learn the speech of God. Like the high priests of ancient times, he hoped to be instructed by the angels. What Dr. Dee did not have was someone who could reliably divine what the angels were trying to tell him. In the brash young Edward Talbot, soon to be Kelly, he being willing and desirous to see or show something in spiritual practice. We read that line from the 5 Books of Mystery, by the way. Dr. Dee found his seer. What we know most about Kelly comes to us through the diaries of John Dee, though much of what Dee tells us about Kelly seems full of what must be intentional omissions. The spirit diaries written by John Dee are, it must be noted, in very large part diaries writing down the spirit visions seen by Edward Kelly. Through the next few years, Edward Kelly would go through what seems to modernize almost a miraculous transformation, from the hard-to-manage crystal gazer of John Dee's diary to the alchemist who apparently can change base metals into silver or gold, and who becomes a knight of the Holy Roman Empire, given lands and honors by Emperor Rudolph II himself. Then almost as rapidly, Kelly falls from grace and dies trying to escape from prison at Havnen Castle. At the same time, the Lord Treasurer of England, William Cecil Lord Berkeley, a man generally known for his pragmatism, launched into a full campaign to bring Sir Edward Kelly back to England, suggesting, among other things, that Kelly could use his alchemical skills to help the English treasury recover from England's miraculous yet expensive defeat of the invincible Spanish Armada. That reference to the Armada and the destruction involves this alleged working of Edward Kelly and John Dee with a heptarchical system of magic that summoned a storm that blew the Armada off of course. This is very similar. This is why we might have the imagery of Prospero and the Tempest from Shakespeare's Tempest being associated with Dr. John Dee as well. So this is from Alchemical Writings, a short history of the rise and fall of Sir Edward Kelly. And here we've got the icosahedron, sacred geometry, a Platonic solid. So let's decode the Monas Hieroglyphica. This work comes from Alan Green. Alan Green is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful source on this stuff. He is delightful to look at, and I actually believe that he, among all of the scholars who are speaking about John Dee, has grasped the nature of what, or the implications of what he's talking about, right? The celestial communications that imply a sense of unity. So to give you this story, here's a frontispiece from Shakespeare's sonnet. There are specific weird dots all over the place, and then when you do mathematics and geometry on it, it reveals geometry that is expressed in the pyramids. It also relates to the Enochian tables communicated by the angels to John Dee and Edward Kelly in Krakow. So these this reveals a code. So this is what Alan Green says. There's a code in Shakespeare, and he's gone through amazing work to discover it. He's and it points actually to like this is like Da Vinci Code stuff, but it literally points to an altar in a church that has a secret compartment that Alan has actually verified by bringing in like a LiDAR or radar device into the church. After spending like he needed to get that in, so he literally wrote a play. He befriended the church. He brought the play in so that he could put up banners in front of the altarpiece, so that he could radar what is in the altar. And lo and behold, there's like the altar was like mysteriously constructed, and it also has space in it, space that's unexpected. And so my hope is that it contains some of the secret writings of John Dee, or other things too. But in this case, so he's working with the Bard code, and he's got great material on the internet. Please watch some of his videos. Please go into here. But the reason why I say Alan has understood the material is because you can, he talks about the implications of some of these things. And some of this is that all of the physical constants, right? The constants like pi, Euler's number, phi, Planck's constant, they all have a significance, and they all add up to like unity experience. So either 1.11111 forever or 1. And so in that way, literally these codes are pointing to physical constants, an understanding of physical constants that are pointing to the message that all is one, and then the actual physical experience of communing with these intelligences or contemplation of these mathematical things, right, creates a space in the mind that is somewhat existential, meaning you have to contemplate the unity of everything. All is one, right? So in this way, he's done a lot of work to decode a lot. So check that work out. Thank you to Alan Green for such dedication. We've got now the meaning of the Monas Hieroglyphica with regards to geometry. This is again by Egan, associated with the Newport Tower, the building constructed according to the specifications by Dee with a camera obscura experience. The thing here to understand is the Monas Hieroglyphica, the symbol equals a cubooctahedron, which is, we'll show it, you see it here, but it is, Buckminster Fuller talked a lot about it. This is a wonderful book. I still don't understand all of it, but I really enjoyed looking at it. And you can see these on the left side, the conjunctivo and separatio process, these sort of kissing tetrahedrons and things like that. So Egan's put out meaning of Monas hieroglyphica in regards to number as well. So there's literally codes. They really help decode what, at least the mathematics of what Dee was talking about. So check those out if you're curious about that. We've got now the work by Dan Winter called Compressions, the Hydrogen Atom, and Phase Conjugation. So I'll just read it. This is from the beginning of the paper. You can get into it. It is as Winter says, an explanation of gravity. Like, how does gravity work? I don't understand this, but I wanted just to read some of this to give you a flavor of what's going on. So, is the golden ratio optimized phase conjugation in the way that multiple compression waves converge constructively, thus the origin of spin vorticity solved, in the process, the origin of all centripetal forces, including gravity? The question of how to cohere the vacuum is not unlike Don Quixote tilting his sword as he attacks the windmill. Actually, the unified field appears to be made of a compressible unified substance which behaves like a fluid in the wind. It matters little whether you call it aether or ether or the space-time continuum of curved space, or as we choose to call it, the compression and rarefication of the vacuum as really particle/wave of charge itself. What is important to constantly imagine yourself part of a truly unified field. This avoids the religious war-generating schizophrenia of those who consider their physics and their field theory quite and truly separate from their spirituality and life essence. We think that such a dichotomy is a fatal mistake. The reason that Don Quixote holds the clue here is that the unified field, and therefore the huge inertia which is clearly present in the vacuum, is literally like a wind. So, tilting at windmills with the right angle approach to transform the wind power to a life-giving, energizing advantage and not to be blown away by it is the appropriate way to gain the power of nature. Consider the pine cone or the chicken egg or DNA proteins, for example. Along the lines of the windmill analogy, clearly they arrange themselves into the perfect windmill-like configuration to catch the charge in the wind of gravity, the vacuum. The perfect windmill to catch the voltage, the energy, is clearly pinecone fractal shaped. Elsewhere, we discuss ways to measure the millivolt called life force, which pine cones and eggs clearly extract from the vacuum. You can get more information at goldenmean.info/biophoton. The reason this fractality catches the implosive collapse wind of charge called gravity is the same reason that it causes gravity. So, and then here we have an image from fractal conjugate spacetime, causes of negentropy, gravity, and perception, conjuring life, the fractal shape of time, geometric origins of biologic negentropy. So this is a really interesting book by Dan Winter. You can get to it on some of his websites or from Amazon. Has a lot of these kind of geometric patterns, and this is one of the reasons why in all of these things, especially in the sense of not seeing ourselves as separate from the field, why we are contemplating geometries. So another bit of decoding by the Bridges-Winter pair. It's like Bridges in this handbook, he writes about it. So here we go. Unlike the Hebrew 16-cell 4D figure, which uses only 8 of 22 letters and delineates no further internal 4D components, but is used at every working, The Ophanic 4D octahedron is fully developed structurally and never used directly in the Ophanic language or system. Ophanic here, again, is the Enochian. It's the Enochian. And we're talking about the structures implied by the alphabets expressed in geometry. So again, this is sort of abstract, but it's important to know or get the flavor of how these things can be decoded so you understand the relevance. This here is literally like talking in the movie Contact by Carl Sagan, when they receive all this information, they're trying to see it on one piece of paper. They're trying to line up these pieces of paper. It doesn't make sense, but they have to do it in another dimension. And they go, oh, wow, this is what we're talking about, 4D. We're taking a step up from the 3D geometries we've been looking at and into another dimension. And you have to use kind of a magical imagination to do that. Anyways, back to it. It seems to be a mental construct designed to be absorbed by the unconscious and then used to leverage the interactions of the system at the level of the DNA. It is helpful to think of the Ophanic 4D octahedron as a seed containing all the possible DNA-derived probability waves. In other words, the literal matrix of creation. The Ophanic language developed from the squares described in Liber Logaeth, or the Book of the Speech of God. Some of this early form of the Ophanic language resembles verb tense and other grammatical drills. None of this was translated directly into English, although Dee ventured a few interpretations. At any rate, a large number of squares were generated in this trance-like way. In 1584, Dee and Kelly received instructions on how to convert the squares of some of the tables in the Liber Logaeth into invocations and calls. This time, the angels provided a translation. We read some of that translation in the beginning. The language that emerged had English phonology and grammar, but the roots and other vocabulary elements are not directly derivable from English, Latin, Greek, or Hebrew. Some roots are similar to Sanskrit and Egyptian, but some are simply alien in construction and pronunciation. The keys or calls contain the purest example of the Ophanic language that we have. The names formed from the tablets are more random in appearance and are much more difficult to translate. The keys seem to provide a literary structure, the grammar and syntax, that is needed to operate the more complex frequency signatures embedded within the structure. And if you're interested actually in a practitioner of the Ophanic or Enochian, I would check out Enochian Today. There's a man that works with the Enochian to establish different calls or different communications. So there's a really kind of joyful exploration there. We've got the cubooctahedron here. Great. And so now we're at, I believe, the penultimate session or section of this bibliography tour of the inquiry. This is all about extraterrestrial, extradimensional, and non-human intelligence contact. This is why we're talking about this matter, because the work of CE5, the work of disclosure, the experience that people are having in relating to both lights in the sky phenomena, light being appearances, telepathic communion. I see it happen in abductions and dreams. I work as a hypnotist supporting people with these things. It's actually a thing that's happening. It's actually a thing that's happening. Extraterrestrial, extradimensional, non-human contact is literally happening. So that's why we're talking about this, is because the Dee and Kelly thing can help solve some of the issues we're experiencing in contact. And so CE5 stands for Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. This handbook comes from two CE5 practitioners, one from Calgary, one from Japan, working together to produce this handbook. And so I'll just simply read this. And it's free online. Go to ace5handbook.com. It's a wonderful read if you're curious about it. This is the source I would turn to over Dr. Stephen Greer, primarily because of the authenticity of heart of the authors. So a close encounter is a term invented by Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who studied close unidentified flying objects, UFOs, with the U.S. Air Force between the years 1947 and 1969. The original Hynek classification system of close encounters had 3 types, with subsequent researchers adding to the list. Close encounters can be broadly divided into 2 groups. The first kind of contact, CE 1, 2, 3, and 4, are all where an encounter with a UFO or extraterrestrial is passive in nature. It is either accidental or indirect, where the ETs initiate the encounter. If it happens, it is often outside of our control. A CE5, on the other hand, is where humans actively initiate contact and where we sustain peaceful bilateral communications with ETs. What does the CE5 look like? It could look like many things, but much of the time, a CE5 is where one person or several people gather together to meditate and send a message to our ET friends. Internal and external messages are received back. CE5s are most often done in the field under the stars to allow for multiple eyewitness sightings of UFOs. This works. I've done it. We've done it with Dan Berg. It's been amazing. It's beautiful. One thing to know is, in terms of the proof, right? People often say, like, we need proof. Well, actually, you need testimony. You need experience. You don't actually need proof. That's the thing that is the invitation here. That's why we get the slightly more significant yet slightly more than chance effect when we do the laboratory studies of telepathy. We see, like, yes, indeed, telepathy exists. We can prove that, but everyone's really, really bad at it in the laboratory setting. I think it's because they don't, the consciousness of the field does not want to provide overwhelming proof, because there is literally ontological shock and harm that can be done when these things are proven. So that is why I think one of the karmic reasons why Edward Kelly has such a mystery about him is because his status as an alleged counterfeiter created such a field of doubt around this communication that it can't overwhelm anyone with its gravity of proof, and therefore cause a harmful ontological shock experience. But in that way, these things invite participation. And if you are curious and you want to know and you want to experience it, you want evidence. Like, evidence is literally your experience. Just like Winter said, don't separate your own experience from the physical. Like, you can't do that. It does violence to the whole system. So you are actually invited to participate in these things. That's a little bit of an aside here. The next thing I want to call out in terms of contact that's happening is the Rama group. This is from Wikipedia. Originally called the Rama mission, it was named after the goal that I shared: Ra, sun, Ma, earth. A contact program that seeks to transform the human being into a star, into a sun on Earth. It was the organization of groups of sympathizers of the method promoted by Poswells to contact those who he called extraterrestrial guides. And you can get to the Rama mission on Facebook. This is literally where a lot of our notions of CE5 come from. This is that sort of movement is what brought Dan Berg to Atacama Desert. So I'm calling that out by way of saying, hey, this is a thing, check it out. The Rama mission on Facebook gave like a 24-week course on these things. It was wonderful. I participated in it right before this experience. So check that out. We've got a quote from the Law of One. I want to just focus more on that because of its experience. And so we've got the questioner asks, how does a third density planet become fourth density? Ra says, I am Ra. This will be the last question. The fourth density is, as we have said, as regularized in its approach as the striking of a clock upon the hour. The space-time of your solar system has enabled this planetary sphere to spiral into space-time of a different vibration configuration. This causes the planetary sphere to be able to be molded by these new distortions. However, the thought forms of your people during this transition period are such that the body-mind-spirit complexes of both individual and societies are scattered throughout the spectrum instead of being able to grasp the needle, shall we say, and point the compass in one direction. Thus, the entry into the vibration of love, sometimes called by your people the vibration of understanding, is not effective with the present societal complex. Thus, the harvest shall be such that many will repeat the third density cycle. The energies of your wanderers, your teachers, and your adepts at this time are all bent on increasing the harvest. However, there are few to harvest. So here we've got this sense of harvest. I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about wanderers, which are essentially starseeds as put forward by Dolores Cannon's experience. The harvest here is the sense of ascension. You may have heard of ascension to 5D. This is where a lot of the New Age understanding comes from. However, we can look actually to the spirit writings of Spirit Diaries of John Dee, and he does talk about the harvest. So there is a sense of continuity throughout the generations around focusing on a harvest. This is a sense of millennialism, perhaps, or even apocalypticism. This is a thing that we are working with now as the end of an old age and the beginning of a new, through the opening of veils between this world and the other world. And it's a kind thing. It's not what the fundamentalist Christians would say in terms of the like revelations and dragons in the sky and burning of the earth. It's really a sense of consciousness, a movement of consciousness, and that's it. We talked a little bit about beyond UFOs in the first session, and this is really important to talk about. Again, this comes from the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute, the Foundation for the Research of Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences, FREE. They are associated, CCRI and FREE are associated. This is a statistical survey of more than 4,000 individuals who have had UFO contact and contact with non-human intelligences. There's a lot of things that contradict our common worldview about ETs or non-human intelligences. And I share this table just a kind of give you the sense that the majority of people who have had a contact experience have experienced more desire to help others, more compassion for others, appreciation of ordinary things, sensitivity to suffering, concern with spiritual matters. All of these things have increased. Appreciation of nature, understanding what life is about, acceptance of others. So this is really testimony. This is really testimony that we don't actually have to be afraid in the way that some of the alien threat narrative puts forward. And so it's really one of the reasons why I'm doing this work and putting forward this inquiry is that we've got the data, we've got the testimony, but we're behaving in a crazy way. We're not actually receiving that testimony and taking action on it. We're actually fetishizing the alien threat. We're like looking at it like we might look at blockbusters. We're like, oh my God, the CIA, they're putting out more information. The Pentagon, who cares about the Pentagon, right? Like those guys are liars and manipulators. They all are. I mean, that's the history of those organizations. I do actually am much more hopeful now in terms of what's happening. I think those people too, like the liars and the manipulators from the 60s where we have the experience of the MK Ultra, I believe just like I am capable of transformation, they are capable of transformation. And I'm actually really hopeful that this disclosure is being done in a kind way, this slow drip disclosure, and that they have likely had experiences of unity consciousness as well. That's my understanding. But I would actually invite a sense of moving from looking to the media or looking to these intelligence communities to define our reality. Let's say, no, that's crazy. We actually have to return the authority to ourselves. And for me personally, when I see the testimony, the only statistical study about interactions with non-human intelligences, combined with my reading backwards and forwards of the history of philosophy and the history of contact, I say it's a positive thing. There are challenges, but is overwhelmingly positive, and there is like everything. The beginning of Western history begins with communications with non-human intelligences that are positive. So the reason why there's a psychological complex, our subconscious is not yet willing to accept the truth of these matters, the testimony, when we are engaging with this alien threat. And I think part of it is because we haven't acknowledged the history that has gone before, and this is the history I'm putting forward now. All right. The Our Wild Cosmos, the paper by Exo Studies. This is a brilliant thing. So it's basically a holistic and integrative approach. Do check out that stuff. I'm putting here. I want you just to know about the mutual enactment hypothesis. So the paper goes through 10 of the major hypotheses about what UAPs are, what UFOs, what non-human intelligences are. Who are these? What's happening, right? So some people go, oh, it's extraterrestrials, it's extra-dimensionals, ultra-terrestrials. These are ourselves from the future coming back to correct a thing. Oh, it's dark military, it's psychosocial, it's earthlights, it's intrapsychic, it's co-creative, it's a breakaway civilization, it's artificial intelligence, or it's all of them, everything all at once, that sort of thing. And I actually think that we need to hold on to other explanations, right? So I often think about, we've got the case of J. Allen Hynek of the Blue Book study, who was kind of like a disinformation. Oh, this is swamp gas. He's the guy that said, oh, this thing in Michigan was swamp gas. Actually, he opened up to it and has a great legacy in terms of that. He is like, maybe these are UFO or like ETs, right? Like we think they're ETs. The testimony of people oftentimes says they're ETs. On the other hand, we've got Jacques Vallée, who says, hey, these things are like fairies. They're like fairies. They might be lying to us in that way. They might be something like a intrapsychic or ultra-terrestrial, extra-dimensional hypothesis. They can be both. It can be both. We don't have to say that one hypothesis is true over another, because this is a multi-dimensional and highly strange world. So I say everything that can be a reasonable hypothesis is actually true. So that's one of the things that is important to understand here. And in the way of engaging, the mind does not want to accept this. The mind wants to categorize and say, yes, this is that. No, this isn't that. That's what the mind wants to do. This is the source of suffering. This is the source of suffering as we understand in Buddhism. The way to relate to that is dropping down into the body, into mindfulness practice, into doing what Winter says is engaging with both the physical understanding and also the spiritual understanding. And this is one of the ways we can do that. All right. So now we've got Dolores Cannon talking about the like genetic harvest extraterrestrial hypothesis. And that genetic harvest is actually a thing. It's physically happening. There are scars on people. There are memories coming up. If you want to see that, you can see my public. One of my clients went public, Sandra Newman, on the Robert Earl White's channel, We Are Disclosure, Order of Light, talking about that. So that's real. But she's talking about theories related to that. Many think gene manipulation or engineering is occurring with various goals in mind. Some think ours is a superior race that has almost reached its perfection, and the aliens may be from an imperfect or dying race. Maybe they somehow have lost the ability to reproduce themselves and therefore need our species' sperm and ova to help perpetuate their own dying race. They hope to accomplish this by interbreeding, if not physically, then clinically, and producing human-alien hybrids. The idea is viewed with horror by human beings, and thus we consider anyone with this goal in mind to be also horrible. My theories are different. I do not believe that they are doing this for their purposes, but for ours. Of course, we have seen that there are several different types of entities involved, and there can be And there could be some negative types doing things for their own gains. But I believe that these are in the minority, the renegades or mavericks of the UFO groups. As I explained in my book, Keepers of the Garden, there is a higher power at work directing a plan that was fashioned for our world aeons before the first humans appeared upon our planet. This master plan was conceived and worked out by methods far beyond our comprehension. Now I want to talk about quantum healing. And this is, I practice beyond quantum healing, which was put forward by Candace Craw Goldman. It is like QHHT, the quantum healing hypnosis technique, but brought into, allowing for more creativity of the practitioner and also for Zoom sessions, which is why it's really effective in my work, because I live in kind of rural areas. So here in the training, we understand, basically she says, like, watch out for past, like you do a quantum healing session, basically you induce relaxation and you invite the person to go on a visionary journey of sorts, an imaginal or spirit journey. And these are all the types of sessions that can arise. And it's past life, current life, parallel life, future life, animal, cellular, object life, extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, energy being or non-physical life, source or soul origin, or any combination of the above sessions. So again, this is a sense of the mutual enactment type of hypothesis where who knows? And that's one of the favorite parts of the session is after the induction, you go, now describe your first impressions. And then I get to work with clients in pulling out where they are. We often use kind of an algorithmic way of relating to the senses. What are you seeing? Is it light or dark? What are you feeling? Is it soft or warm or cold? That sort of thing. So starting to flesh out the situation in words without using leading questions. But we get to discover all these different wide variety of things. And so that's actually my experience of the extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, and non-human intelligence. Contact is everything. There's so much happening. I want to let you know that I have put out another inquiry very similar to this. It's about 2 hours into alien abduction, missing time, hypnosis, and dreams. So check that out. And there's, I've produced a few inquiries around that. So check out the YouTube channel and also the website if you want to go more into that. I recently put out dreams, UFO, UAPs, extraterrestrial and non-human intelligent contact, and dreams as well in inquiry. So you can learn more at cosmicdreamsanctuary.org or on the YouTube channel. So here's the hypercube. Take a look at this. Get another glass of water. Apparently what you're seeing here is, okay, here's the cube. We see a cube and then it's moving, and so there's a shape that emerges as we pay attention to the fourth dimension of time. It sort of just blows my mind. All right. We are in the last section. Thank you for being with me in this really interesting inquiry. It is, I know, long, but this represents nearly a decade of my life, probably a little bit more. And so now we're in the section titled Healing the Apocalypse. So that's what this is really about, is the sense of healing any rifts in our world, healing the issues that arose from the karma associated with empire, the magical founding of the British Empire. So how can we heal from that? Just to let you know, like, I talk about empire as something we need to heal from, and we actually really do, primarily because empire led to genocide and slavery and destruction of the environment. Even though likely John Dee had good intentions at heart, likely everyone involved in the colonial endeavors probably had some of their some good intentions, right? It actually incurred a tremendous amount of karma. We are still living in that, and it's bogging us down. And so we just need to do the work of acknowledgement, of forgiveness, of reparations, and it's easier, I think, than we often are afraid of. In this case, right? So the magic mirror. There's when I started this inquiry, like the day after the regression, basically this article came up. The obsidian mirror associated with the Elizabethan polymath and magus John Dee has been an object of fascination for centuries. The mirror, however, has a deeper history as an Aztec artifact brought to Europe soon after the Spanish conquest. The authors present the research of new geochemical analysis and explore its history and changing cultural context to provide insight into its meaning during a period in which entirely new worldviews were emerging. The biography of the mirror demonstrates how a complex cultural history underpins an iconic object. The study highlights the value of new compositional analyses of museum objects for reinterpretation of historically significant materials. So this article goes on to say that this mirror, the magic mirror of John Dee, likely was literally like the eye of a mural of the Aztec god of divination, and there likely was blood sacrifice associated with it, and it likely came to John Dee by way of Spanish conquest, by colonialism. So the mirror itself has a vibration of a blood sacrifice, of colonization. And so I understand, right, like a lot of this stuff we use should really have a clear vibration when we're reaching out to the spirit world. Like there had to be some sort of influence there in terms of the experience. And so I thought it was really interesting and synchronistic, actually, in terms of my own inquiry into the matter, that this came up and out. And I would love to see some sort of process. I created a change.org petition to bring the mirror back to its like rightful people. Not because it does feel right. I mean, it was revered as the eye of a god. It's also, I would love to see the English speaking people realize, like, even though we're attached to the mirror, it can be a symbol of reparation, a symbol of goodwill, and letting go of the history of attachment with this life, of this Elizabethan periods. We can let go of a lot of those issues because we're actually entering into a galactic golden age, the new Earth that John Dee wanted to bring out. We're going into it, so we don't need to hold on to those things in the past. That's the message here. Also in the group, one of our members brought forward this article, and I'll read it from here. Arthur Dee was John Dee's son, named after King Arthur because he really revered that sense of mythology associated with the British Empire. So what secret alchemical knowledge could be so important it required sophisticated encryption? The setting was Amsterdam, 2019. A conference organized by the Society for the History of Alchemy and Chemistry had just concluded at the Embassy of the Free Mind in a lecture hall opened by historical fiction author Dan Brown. At the conference, Science History Institute postdoctorate researcher Megan Piorco presented a curious manuscript belonging to English alchemists John Dee and his son Arthur Dee. In the pre-modern world, alchemy was a means to understand nature through ancient secret knowledge and chemical experiment. Within Dee's alchemical manuscript was a cipher table followed by encrypted ciphertext under the heading Hermeticae Philosophiae Medulla, or the marrow of the Hermetic philosophy. The table would end up being a valuable tool in decrypting the cipher, but could only be interpreted correctly once the hidden key was found. It was during post-conference drinks in a dimly lit bar that Megan decided to investigate the mysterious alchemical cipher with the help of her colleague, University of Graz postdoctorate researcher Sarah Lang. And so they decode this text. It's pretty interesting. You can read the article. It's linked in the references. So again, we have this, within the year, right, we have two major discoveries of related to the history of John Dee, and I appreciate all of this work coming forward, and I think this is the world asking us to take a look at this story. Another one of our participants brought forward this article. It is called, "Did Dark Magic Conjure Up the British Empire?" The British Empire was not founded. It was conjured up by John Dee, Queen Elizabeth I's court magician. There are two versions to the tale. Either Dee summoned a demon, or he sacrificed Christopher Marlowe, the famous playwright, in a blood ritual. There is no evidence except the very circumstantial. If the Marlowe version is to be believed, the dark magic ritual must have been performed at the end of May 1593. That is when official history says the playwright met a violent end in a tavern brawl in Deptford, just south of the Thames and east of London. That gives us a date. We also have a place. Stubborn rumor has it that the conjuring was done on the Isle of Dogs, just north of Thames, in the east of London. The exact spot is allegedly marked by a mysterious stone circle tucked away near an elder grove in the northwest corner of Mudchute Park. Check out the article. It's in the references. You'll see a map. You'll also see the Monas Hieroglyphica associated with those places. In the regression I did, actually, I put forward imagery of a sort of 13th hour blood sacrifice experience. So that is part of the imaginal journey. I'm not saying this is a historical fact. I'm saying that the symbology of blood sacrifice could be meaningful. I'm taking the Jungian perspective here. This is the Jungian perspective. So that the blood sacrifice is understood symbolically, that it is sort of a blood sacrifice to conjure the British Empire, in that blood sacrifice, that blood ritual has a karmic impact on the British Empire and our experience of contact and colonization and in these contact worlds. So that's what I'm calling for, is an understanding of a symbolic nature, much in the same way Jung called for the symbolic understanding of alchemy and flying saucers. So I hope you take that as you will. Here is a comic book that Dark Lines of London. This is John Dee as a necromantic type figure. Again, this is a sort of backwards and forwards in time story. Really interesting. I haven't actually read all of it, but I wanted to share the imagery here. And this bit of fiction actually gives flesh to the conjectures put forward in the last slide. So hopefully I'll read this one soon. Here is the Enochian / Ophanian practice group on Facebook. Its admins are Terry Burns, who we've mentioned. She's recently put forward a wonderful version of the Monas Hieroglyphica. It's got Dan Winter, who's here, who we've mentioned, and there's Alan Moore, who has a beautiful, beautiful voice. They are putting forward Enochian magic as a sort of spiritual practice of self-development for the benefit of society. And I would say this, and I absolutely love the inherent feminism of this, right? Because the sense of the secret societies holding back the knowledge, right? I love seeing this group here. I love seeing the files and the sharing and things like that. So I'll read their description so you can get a sense of it, and if you want, you can find it on Facebook. This is a discussion group for practitioners and students of Enochian Ophanic magic and the works of John Dee and Edward Kelly and those around them. Some materials are available at fractalu.com, and many, many others are in the file section. And please do, that's where a lot of the Bridges handbooks come from. It has wonderful, wonderful guides to setting up temple space. There's papers in there that help you navigate through the magical blinds and the ciphers involved. I relied on those in my construction of the elemental tablets, the drawing of the holy table, the other the magical blinder on the sigillum de Ameth, and things like that. So our topics range from Renaissance magic to ancient Greek geometry to Western and Chinese alchemy to quantum and plasma physics, and how one might express the ideas of the Emerald Tablet in modern terms, modern concepts of energy and dimensionality. We also digress onto mystical mathematics and sacred geometry, particularly as used by John Dee, Buckminster Fuller, and Dan Winter. This is not a place to come as your first stop in the experiential study of Enochian. It is a forum to exchange knowledge. If you would like to learn more about Enochian alchemy, or for that matter, plasma physics, and especially if you would like to study their interrelation, we urge you to get personal instruction. These are not things that most people can just learn by participating in a Facebook group. They've got a quote, "Heaven is right where you are standing, and this is the best place to train." All right. So here is the Merkaba, this final sacred geometric form, the Merkaba. All right. Oh, that's Metatron's cube. You can see the Merkaba in there, in the sort of Star of David pattern. Here we are. I want to read to you the book of a bit from the Book of Galactic Light. So I mentioned I did the ritual of celestial communication. I started on November 11th at 4:44 a.m. I continued for 30 days. I generally woke up at 3 a.m. It was about 45 minutes of chanting Enochian, and then 15 to an hour and a half of visionary scrying material I recorded. I didn't actually know I was going to talk to angels. I thought either I would just say prayers and nothing would happen, or I thought the magic mirror would phase out and I would be able to see extraterrestrials with my physical eyes. I was sort of surprised when it felt very much like a shamanic journey, hypnosis experience, an assisted channeling experience. It felt really imaginal, and I sort of just went with it. Even after the experience, I didn't really believe it was celestial communication until my wife said, "You've been working on this way too much," and they're actually showing up. I did it with CE5 radios. So a CE5 radio, and they actually communicated with me there. So there was a bit of cognitive dissonance around the communications. But this quote comes from the scrying of the Aether Lil, the first Aether. This is the most central experience. And so I want to share this with you because the angel of the Lord, Metatron, the Shining One, he interacted with me throughout the ritual. He was sort of my guide. And he in this last ritual, there's this the radios were going crazy, the emotions were very strong, and they left me with this very, very strong invitation. And so I'll just read this to you here. This is the end of the ritual. The angel shows me an image of family and loved ones simply waiting for us, yearning for us to open the doors that are present and active in the portals within this earth and on this earth and in our hearts and minds and dreaming bodies and waking bodies. Any portal we have, the other side of which has loved ones waiting for us and calling us forward. That is what is waiting on the other side, a paradise of the new earth filled with so many beings that we have known in many different lifetimes, just waiting for us, so full of love. They want to help us as much as we can receive. He says that there's nothing to worry about, that there's so much issue on our planet of war and destruction and pollution and those horrible things. But on the other side of those portals are beings who love us, who helped create this world, fashioning this world out of love. So there's really nothing to worry about, and that our work here is to shift the unreality, the illusion of our minds that have identified with these dense bits of matter, to simply practice loosening it. That is all that is asked for, just to be more open than closed. They'll help us. There's no need to worry. It really does come down to each individual here stuck in the illusion of samsara and darkness just to practice and to open to the heart within. There's wisdom and the portal within. It doesn't have to be involved. It can just be thinking, yes, I want this. Yes, I want to connect with others in love, in my true reality as the creator of being, expressive of divine love. He says that the working of aeons is accomplished. Thank you, it is done. The vision completes with much love. Thank you, so be it. Amen. Here's an example of the Book of Galactic Light. This is me chanting in this experience. You can see the holy table covered by the red cloth with the golden tassels. You can see the obsidian mirror supported by the sigillum de ameth underneath there, surrounded by the ensigns of creation. You can see on the wall different tables of Enochian language. You can see me chanting the Enochian there. In the bottom right corner, you can see the CE5 radios. I do want to say a little bit about that so you understand context. The CE5 radios, they are shortwave radios that are tuned to a frequency 144.101, which is a legal frequency to transmit on, but I only listen. There's no transmission. It's also a harmonic of light. This methodology is put forward by Jimmy Blanchett and Mark Sims. The idea is basically two identical radios tuned to the same frequency should respond to the same radio expression happening at once. But if one goes on and the other doesn't, something funny is happening. So I filmed them as a way to add a kind of physicalized experience. Sometimes it feels funny, sometimes it feels intelligent. There's a lot there. I actually think there was a mathematical communication that happened in some of them. I ran a sensor, a Raspberry Pi sense hat with a magnetometer, all sorts of stuff on one of the aethers, one of the scrying things, and after that, the radios beeped a lot, and like sometimes you can ask them questions and they respond in a very intelligent way. They indicated that there was sort of a key frequency in that data. I haven't looked at it primarily because the written word was so much for me to work with. So if you want to know more, you can go to cosmicdreamsanctuary.org/book. All right, summary of findings. Thank you for going on this rather long and interesting and strange journey with me. This is literally the culmination of a decade or more of work. And so we have seen that the British Empire in part was founded upon magical rituals of angelic communication performed by the scholar, royal advisor, and magist John Dee. Dee performed angelic communications for the purpose of healing, empire, and knowledge. The angelic entities provided a system of communication that has meaning along multiple dimensions. The language is complex and meaningful, as we've seen, contains codes related to the physical constants, cryptography, and socio-religious themes of the highest order, e.g. the formation of the British Empire and spycraft related to the Holy Roman Empire. It inspired centuries of magical practice at the highest order, namely Rosicrucianism, Masonic practice, Order of Golden Dawn, OTO, Jack Parsons, and the American Space Program. The conclusions here is that contact with celestial beings have been ongoing as long as recorded history, that there is a significant karmic resonance between our current time and Dee, especially regarding ET contact. Individual and collective psychological complexes have ontological significance. So that's important to understand, that these issues that we're having have ontological significance in terms of how we are relating to the extraterrestrial contact phenomenon. And if you need to know more about how that works, please turn to the Exo Studies paper, Our Wild Cosmos. Forgiveness of the past karmas will enable a new world. So John Dee wanted to invoke the apocalypse to go into the new earth. So the thing that will enable this to happen is to forgive past karmas, the empires, to forgive ourselves for whatever we've done, and to actually work and open up to love and peace and connection. So you are actually now invited to make contact and enter the new earth. How do you do that, right? How do you do that? This is a message coming from the celestial beings now, in terms of my work with them in the Book of Galactic Light. Step 1, be more open than closed. All the celestials are asking is that you be more open than closed. It's a habit of mind. It's not a state of being. Just be more open than closed to the notion that you are more than you can imagine. You can be open right now just by playing, exploring, and having fun. It's a habit of mind, not a state of being, because your true state of being is one of unity with all things as enlightened activity. So the thing that we're working with is strictly the mind to associate itself, to establish those habits of mind, of identification with this deeper field of love, right? Step 2, contemplate that we are all one. We are all one. Everything is connected. Separation is only an illusion. These are concepts that you're invited to contemplate. Ultimately, the celestial beings invite you to identify with all things. Think of it this way. The world is a dream, and you are one of its many characters. When you're in the dream, you forget that you're dreaming it all. Wake up now to the dreamlike nature of our reality. Wake up to the fact that you are the mind in which all of this dream is happening. Step 3, forgive others as you would be forgiven. If this world is something like a dream, then all of it is you, even if it feels like a nightmare. You are invited to forgive the unforgivable, the perpetrators of your own victimization, as if they are you. When we get too attached to our story of ourselves as a victim, move away from the higher densities we move away from the higher density experience of unity consciousness. While we don't need to tolerate harmful behavior, the celestials invite us to experience unity through love and forgiveness as a prerequisite for ascension into the new earth. Step 4, you embody unity consciousness. Unity consciousness is a very interesting notion. It recognizes that we are all one. It implies a connection between all conscious beings. All conscious beings are telepathic or psychic in some way. It's often very subtle, but even materialist science recognize psi-related phenomenon at rates slightly more than chance. By embodying unity consciousness means that you've worked through your attachments to your personal ego illusion. It is stepping into a telepathic collective of all beings. You don't have to hold it all in your mind. Just feel love in your heart, and you can work with assisting beings like the celestials. Step 5, believe, intend, and invite. Once we open up to the unity consciousness, the new earth is open to us. We can relate with a greater community and use higher levels of technology. We can transmute the evils of our last age into a golden age. We can talk to elementals, extraterrestrials. We can teleport through the portal system. We can fly in light ships. The angels say that to do these things, all you need to do is believe, intend, and invite. They say you'll connect with the most relevant aspect of unity consciousness, who then can help you. If you want to teleport, you talk to a portal being. If you want to fly in a light ship, you ask it. All right, so you can read the book, which has all of the references in it, at cosmicdreamsanctuary.org/book. It's a free PDF. You can email me if you want a different format, or you can buy a physical book on Amazon, or you can see the ritual itself. So this is Book of Galactic Light, cosmicdreamsanctuary.org/book. So I just want to say that and we're done with the inquiry now. I'm going to promote some of this stuff here at Cosmic Dream Sanctuary. Thank you again so much for being with me on this wild journey. So I offer group sessions and services. This is the first thing the celestial beings had me do after the ritual. It was not the production of the book. It wasn't anything. They had me edit the videos and put it up before the solstice. And once that was done, they recommended this sort of work. And this is really around working with concepts, giving a space of practice and contemplation. We're not necessarily studying Enochian or celestial contact. We're doing what I like to do in terms of hypnosis and dream topics in service to this, on Wednesday nights, every other Wednesday night or so. And then on Sunday mornings, we do, like every other Sunday morning, we do contemplation, readings, and music that kind of feel like church. The Sunday morning thing is really based on the Mahayana Buddhist practice. So the Celestials just says, use what you got to establish these habits of mind. For me, it was the experience of being a Shambhala Buddhist out of the context of mystic Christianity, and these hypnosis and dream practices. So that's really what I'm offering, is I'm creating a space in that way, because that's more effective once we've acknowledged where we've been at in this historical journey of empire, is to actually practice these things and practice embodying patterns of mind that lead to unity consciousness. I offer one-on-one sessions by a sliding scale donation, which means if cash is an issue, you just put in what you want. I send the donation link to the donation form after the session. If we record the session, I send it with the recording link. The modalities I offer sessions in are depth hypnosis, beyond quantum healing, meditation instruction, spiritual counseling, and dream work. It all starts with a free and no obligation consultation. I love talking to people. If you're interested in this work, if this work touched you, you can literally just schedule a time with me to chat about it. On the website, you can learn more at cosmicdreamsanctuary.org/sessions. I'd love to invite you to like and subscribe the YouTube channel, Cosmic Dream Sanctuary. This has the recordings of the Book of Galactic Light. It has music, it has my readings of sacred texts, it has case studies of hypnosis, it has these inquiries into these subjects. So this is how I'm actively choosing to engage in a path of education for both myself and those who work with me. So just search for Cosmic Dream Sanctuary on YouTube. So we've come to the end of the journey. Here's an image of this beautiful planet that you're on, right? This is from the moon. This is Earthrise. This image was really potent in our psyches, in our seeing ourselves from almost a celestial point of view. So I would invite you to just tune in to yourself, say thank you for going on this journey. I say thank you for going on this journey with me. This has been a long journey. It's got a lot of material. It's not easy to digest, but it's worth it. And so I would just simply invite you, right? So back in the day, John Dee would live at Mortlake, and the voyagers of discovery, the voyage of the navigators, the people who went from England to the New World, they would stop by his house and they would have a communication with him. He would give them lessons in geometry. He would give them like sextants, and he would say, he would help them understand how to navigate from England to the New World on the voyages of discovery that literally brought the English Empire to the New World, right? So right now, I would invite you to understand yourself as one of those early explorers of the New World. We are about to enter into a new world. You are actually called now to go on a voyage of discovery. I've given you some tools to navigate it, and the tools are very simple. Understand that you yourself are the source of wisdom, of truth, of compassion in your life. You don't have to look to anybody else to define that. You can communicate with celestial beings. You don't have to look to somebody else to receive that communication. You can use examples. I think that's wonderful. I do that in my life. But I really want you to read the Book of Galactic Light and do your own celestial communications. I don't want you to hold that as like, oh wow, this is interesting. This is sacred text or whatever. it is more of an invitation to have you write your own experience, right? This sort of thing. You can connect in with those things. The other invitation I have is just knowing that all is one, that you can just work with your mind to do that, that you don't actually have to understand everything. You can just say yes. You can say, yes, I want to be more open than closed to this new beautiful world. And you can say yes right now with me if you feel that, because the angels will respond. You can say yes now. Yes, I want to engage in a path of discovery, a voyage of discovery. Yes, I call on and invoke the presence of angels of the highest order who are fifth density and above, who act according to the principle of non-harm, the cosmic law of one. I say yes. I invoke in their aid, assistance. I give permission to them to show up in my dreams, to show up in synchronicity and symbol, to communicate with me. Yes, I say yes to my own practice, right? Developing the practices of mind. You might even want to make a commitment right now to establish patterns of mindfulness, habits of mindfulness. Yes, I want to make the commitment to learning mindfulness, to contemplating all is one, and to embodying more and more unity consciousness. Yes, I do that. So that's about it. Just to let you know, it's a sense of letting go of worry, knowing that everything we need is really provided by the wisdom of this world, and we're not separate from it. That's the thing I would leave you with. If you've resonated with this, I would invite you to see how you can explore addressing some of the karmas of the empirical age, the imperialism, the age of empire, right? Like, how can we address some of that, right? We're living in a way that is still doing violence in the way of empire. We are still experiencing victimization and victimizer. We're still engaged in paths of destruction of other cultures and of the environment. Please do commit to acknowledging that and commit to a path of addressing that karma. You don't have to solve it all. Some of it actually may be solved by reaching out to these celestial beings, or actually just activating your own capacities as the alchemist, as truly an alchemist that can transmute some of these poisons. So that's why I'm sharing that with you. Thank you again for being here. May your voyage of discovery magically reveal that all is one.